Chapter 3159. In the warped spacetime, time passed extremely quickly. But Ji Tianxing concentrated on cultivation, fully focused on deducing and comprehending the heaven-punishing divine art, completely forgetting the passage of time. Every day that passed, he would carry out hundreds of deductions and attempts on the heaven-punishing divine art. As day after day passed, the heaven-punishing divine art was perfected at a slow speed, continuously advancing towards an even more profound and powerful realm. Ji Tianxing's strength also slowly increased along with it, becoming stronger day after day. Unknowingly, a year passed. The heaven-punishing divine art's first-level cultivation method was perfected by Ji Tianxing to 70%. His strength also quietly reached the limits of the 7th-level divine lord realm. But he was immersed in the heaven-punishing divine art, deducing, exploring, and experimenting tirelessly. He did not think of impacting 8th-level divine lord realm at all. But cultivation, this sort of thing, was complementary to each other in the first place. Even if he did not deliberately attack the bottleneck and focused on cultivating the heaven-punishing divine art, he could similarly increase his strength, crossing over obstacles and bottlenecks. Just like this, another year passed. In this 1 year, the heaven-punishing divine art's progress became even slower, merely perfecting 30%. But the heaven-punishing divine art's first-level cultivation method, Ji Tianxing successfully deduced it. Even though he only cultivated the first-level cultivation method to the realm of just entering the rudimentary realm and was still very far from proficient and major success, and even further away from grand completion. But he still broke through the bottleneck naturally, reaching 8th-level divine lord realm. When breaking through, Ji Tianxing's entire body gave off a rainbow-colored divine light. 8 divine dragon phantoms condensed above his head, spiraling and dancing for a few days before dissipating. Swoosh! When the 8 dragon phantoms dissipated and the rainbow-colored divine light converged, Ji Tianxing ended his cultivation. He opened both eyes, his gaze like 2 bolts of lightning, striking the warped spacetime until it fluctuated. He emitted an overbearing and sacred aura all over his body, only withdrawing it into his body after a while. The heaven-punishing divine art that I created is indeed a feasible path. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself, his spirits roused and filled with anticipation. A moment later, he got up and observed the surroundings, muttering to himself, I've already been in close seclusion for 2 years and successfully broke through to the 8th stage realm. Half a month should have passed in the outside world. I think Lin Shui, left emissary Jin and the others should have recovered by about 70 to 80%, right? Ji Tianxing looked around and saw Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, Bai Long, and Zhen Hong cultivating. Even Ji Wushuang was also concentrating on cultivating. The current her already successfully broke through to the Divine Lord realm, reaching the 1st-level Divine Lord realm. She had been taught by Yun Yarrow and Ji Ku since she was young, so she knew the importance of strengthening the foundation of Shinto. At this moment, she was consolidating her foundation of the Divine Tao and accumulating her strength. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing nodded slightly with satisfaction. His gaze then fell on Zhen Hong. Zhen Hong cultivated for 2 years and his injuries had long recovered. He was currently at the critical juncture of assaulting the 5th-level Divine Lord realm. If it was in the past, her bloodline power had not been stimulated, and her talent and comprehension were not enough. Even if he tried a few hundred times, he might not succeed. However, things were different now. She had only broken through the bottleneck 7 times, and she was about to succeed. Seeing that there was no suspense in her breakthrough this time, Ji Tianxing felt relieved and left the divine pagoda. Swoosh! A white light flashed. Ji Tianxing returned to the cave. Inside the gloomy and quiet cave, Lin Shui's divine ship was suspended in the air. Ji Tianxing entered the divine ship and rushed to the assembly hall. It was only to see that Lin Shui's injuries had long recovered and ended her cultivation. She was currently sitting in the hall with her eyes closed to rest her mind. Sensing that Ji Tianxing had arrived, she opened both eyes and greeted him. Tianxing, your closed seclusion ended, eh? Really seeing the devil, it's only been a short half a month, how did you become stronger again? Lin Shui just wanted to exchange a few pleasantries with him, but discovered to her surprise that Ji Tianxing's strength became stronger again. Even though she could not see through Ji Tianxing's ins and outs and only felt that he was unfathomable. But she could feel that Ji Tianxing's aura was several times stronger than before. To actually have such a horrifying improvement in such a short time, it was simply terrifying. Ji Tianxing revealed a faint smile and waved his hand. Don't be so surprised. You've known me for so long, haven't you gotten used to it yet? Lin Shui glared at him and said exasperatedly, pervert. Ji Tianxing frowned and said unhappily, don't scold me. I'm not scolding you, I'm praising you. Lin Shui rolled her eyes. Ji Tianxing could not be bothered to chat with her and asked about serious matters. What about the others? How's the recovery of their injuries? Lin Shui said lazily, I've already asked them, they're more or less recovered. If you need anything, I'll get them to gather immediately. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, no need to gather, let them continue to cultivate. I'll steer the divine ship, we'll continue south. With that, he turned to leave and headed to the control room of the divine ship. Lin Shui got up and followed him. She tilted her head and asked, looks like you're determined to go to the royal city and kill Prince Lian and the Emperor of Raging Flame? Ji Tianxing did not stop walking and answered without turning his head, Prince Lian must be killed. As for the Emperor of Raging Flame, we'll see if he's courting death. Lin Shui raised her eyebrows and smiled. Hehe, I like your domineering attitude. You were already strong enough, and now you've become even stronger. It looks like you can do whatever you want in the Great Yang Empire and no one can stop you. Ji Tianxing stepped into the control room, waved his hand to activate the divine formation, and started to steer the divine ship. As he steered the divine ship, he said calmly, that's not accurate. You can't limit yourself to the Great Yang Empire. You should look at the entire Tianbei region. To be precise, I'm invincible under the Divine King realm now. Lin Shui's body stiffened, and she rolled her eyes. Kid, don't you understand something? When others praise you, you should be more humble. That way, others will praise you in the future. You're so straightforward and arrogant. You're so annoying. Ji Tianxing turned to look at her and smiled mockingly. It's good that you hate me. When I heard you say that you like me just now, you gave me a shock. When did I say that I like you? Lin Shui was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She immediately jumped up and exploded. On the surface, she looked very fierce and angry. However, her slightly red cheeks and stuttering voice made her seem a little guilty. Let's pretend that you didn't say anything. Ji Tianxing retracted his gaze and focused on steering the divine ship. After flying out of the cave, he flew high up into the sky at lightning speed. Lin Shui glared at him angrily. Seeing that he did not react, she did not want to harp on this topic. After a moment of silence, seeing that Ji Tianxing did not speak, she felt a little awkward. She pretended to be cold and said, I'll leave the divine ship to you. I'll continue to cultivate. If there's nothing important, I don't want to see you. Ji Tianxing didn't have much of a reaction. He just responded and focused his attention on the various divine formations. They looked like the divine formations that controlled the divine ship. They were more attractive than anything else. Lin Shui was so angry that she gritted her teeth. She stomped her foot and turned to leave. Chapter 3160. Ji Tianxing steered the divine warship and flew over the vast mountain range, leaving the Skywolf County. Next, the divine warship entered the Raging Flame County and was not far from the royal city. The news of Ji Tianxing's decisive battle in the Skywolf City had already spread throughout the Raging Flame Divine Country. Regardless of the size of the factions or sects, they all knew that the 7 major sects had been completely wiped out. In an instant, the entire Raging Flame Divine Country was shaken. Countless factions were shocked and panicked as they discussed spiritedly. At the same time, the news of Ji Tianxing killing more than 1,000 Skywolf city guards had also spread throughout the Divine Country. Everyone knew about it. The King of Raging Flame even issued an edict to dispatch a large number of Imperial guards to encircle and annihilate Ji Tianxing. The various county guards also had to assist. As a result, the entire Raging Flame Divine Country entered a state of war readiness. Ji Tianxing and the others became public enemies. As long as they appeared in front of the public, they would be besieged. However, this was only on the surface. Or rather, this was only the hope of the various factions and the common people. In reality, Ji Tianxing steered the divine warship and flew continuously for 3 days and 3 nights without being attacked or intercepted. Only a few Divine Lord experts formed groups of 3 to 5 to secretly track and check the divine warship's tracks. Although there was a certain factor in this, it was that the divine warship was too fast and difficult to track. However, only a few people understood the deeper reason. The King of Raging Flame issued an edict only for the common people of the divine country to see. It is also equivalent to an official declaration of war against me. But in reality, the King of Raging Flame is very clear that the Imperial Guards and the various county guards cannot kill me. No matter how many come, they will all be sent to their deaths. Instead of dispatching the Imperial Guards to encircle and annihilate me with great fanfare, it is better to send elite experts to keep track of our movements. At the same time, gather a large number of troops and powerful generals outside the royal city and have another decisive battle with us, in the discussion hall of the divine warship. This was Ji Tianxing's answer to everyone's questions. At this moment, the divine warship had already reached the hinterland of the Raging Flame County and would arrive outside the royal city tomorrow morning. Ji Tianxing handed the divine battleship over to left emissary Jin. He gathered Xuelin, Blood Illusion God Monarch, Zhen Hong, and the others for a small meeting. With regards to the upcoming final battle, Lin Shui, Sir God Blood Illusion and the rest were nervous and uneasy. Even though they all believed that Ji Tianxing's strength was absolutely invincible below Divine King. However, they were still worried and anxious. After all, Prince Lian and the King of the Raging Flame Country had joined hands. Not to mention the Heavenly Union sect behind Prince Lian, just the power of the Raging Flame Country's ruler was already terrifying enough. There were countless Imperial Guards, Imperial Palace experts, and Divine Lord powerhouses from the various county cities. The number of Divine Lord powerhouses was definitely astonishing. In this decisive battle, they would be fighting against half of the Raging Flame Divine Country. How could they not be worried? Xuelin hesitated for a moment, then said, Tianxing, although you are very strong, we have too few people. Prince Lian and the ruler of the Raging Flame Country will definitely gather an army of thousands, or even tens of thousands, to deal with us. The Divine Lord powerhouses that the two of them could mobilize were in the tens of thousands. No matter how powerful you are, you won't be able to escape the fate of ants biting an elephant to death. Sir God Blood Illusion also nodded in agreement, and said, Young Master, although we haven't inquired about the movements of Prince Lian and the King of the Raging Flame Country, the situation is already very obvious. Prince Lian and the King of the Raging Flame Country will definitely do their best to kill us. Once we kill our way into the royal city, the King of the Raging Flame Country will lose all face. Actually, we don't have to be so radical and take such a risk. There is no need for us to go alone and fight them head-on. The initiative is in our hands. We can use guerrilla warfare to harass them and kill them one by one. Compared to Lin Shui's straightforwardness, Sir God Blood Illusion's words were slightly more tactful. Moreover, his suggestion was rather pertinent, and everyone agreed to it. At least, the Blood Dragon Right Emissary, Zhen Hong, and Nai Feiyun all agreed with this suggestion. Only Bai Long raised an objection. Without waiting for Ji Tianxing to speak, he explained, Master is well aware of everyone's concerns. However, please believe that Master never fights a battle that he is not confident in. With the divine powers that Master has mastered and the divine pagoda, he is in an invincible position. At the very least, even if we are trapped in the formation of 10,000 troops, we will be safe and can retreat smoothly. However, this situation is absolutely impossible. Not only will Master be absolutely safe, but all of us will be alive and there will be no danger to our lives. In addition, Master has absolute power. Why do we need to use guerrilla warfare and kill them one by one? If we really do that, Prince Lian and the King of the Raging Flame Country will laugh at us. What Master needs to do is to crush them all in an invincible manner. Only in this way can we win to our heart's content. Hearing Bai Long's words, Lin Shui and the others fell silent. Since everyone's safety was guaranteed, what else was there to say? Moreover, Ji Tianxing's reputation in the bloody flame and raging flame divine kingdoms was like thunder that struck fear in people's hearts. He had already become synonymous with lawless, domineering and invincible, and killing God. If they really used guerrilla warfare to harass him, wouldn't they lose their prestige and reputation? When they thought of this, Lin Shui, Zhen Hong, and the others no longer tried to persuade them. Seeing that everyone was silent, Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, "All right, everyone, rest for a while and conserve your energy. There will be a fierce battle tonight. Moreover, this battle will definitely shock the other nations and make our names known throughout Great Yang." Just a few simple words were enough to make everyone's blood boil, and they were filled with fighting spirit. This was especially true for Lin Shui and Bai Long. They had always liked to fight and were filled with anticipation. Although the others were not as excited as the two of them, they were also looking forward to it. After all, as members of the divines who firmly pursued the peak of the divine path, who did not want to be famous? Not long after, everyone returned to their respective secret chambers and sat down to adjust their breathing. Half a day passed quickly. At dawn, the divine ship flew into a vast mountain range. This mountain range was called Flying Dragon Mountain. The mountain range was not big. It ran from east to west and spanned 1,000,000 miles. This was the barrier to the north of the raging flame capital. After crossing Flying Dragon Mountain and crossing hundreds of thousands of miles of plains, they would arrive at the raging flame capital. When the raging flame divine nation was first established, this was the last line of defense for the raging flame capital during the war between the nations. Tonight, this was the last line of defense for Prince Lian and the Emperor of Raging Flame. Among the mountains, on the highest peak of Sky Dragon Mountain, Long the Heavenly Union sect master, the Imperial Guard governor, and a few great generals were armed and ready as they waited quietly. These 8 experts had the highest statuses. They were also the commanders of the army tonight. Behind them, 50 higher divine lords were lined up in a row. There were men and women of all ages, and their appearances and attire were different. Half of them were experts from the inner court who stayed in the palace for a long time and rarely showed themselves. There were also the protectors and elders of the Heavenly Union sect's Raging Flame branch. The other half were the higher divine lords raised by Prince Lian and the Emperor of Raging Flame. These people on the mountain peak were the main force of tonight's battle. There were more than 10,000 elites lying in ambush within 3,000 miles. Tonight, rivers of blood were destined to flow. Chapter 3161. The night sky was as black as ink, devoid of any starlight. At the peak of Sky Dragon Mountain, cold winds howled, and killing intent filled the air. Even the heavens seemed to know that there would be a bloody battle tonight, and they were mourning. Dragon 2, the Heavenly Unity sect master, and the Imperial Army governor waited patiently. Many experts stared at the northern night sky with awe-inspiring gazes, waiting for the light to appear. Waiting in silence was the most torturous. Time seemed to slow down. Only an hour passed, but it felt like an eternity to them. Finally, in the dark night sky of the north, a ray of light appeared. Whoosh! A pitch-black divine ship that was thousands of feet long flew across the sky, shining with 5-colored light. When it was still 1,000 miles away from Sky Dragon Mountain, the divine ship slowed down. The divine ship didn't conceal itself, nor did it conceal its aura. When it appeared, the expressions of Dragon 2, the Heavenly Unity sect master, and many experts changed. Anger appeared on their faces, and they frowned. Their gazes became even colder and sharper. Tianxing is here. Everyone, prepare to set up the array. Dragon 2 said in a low voice as he stared at the divine ship. Although he was humble and flattering in front of Prince Lian, he still had to act humble and flattering. But in front of outsiders, he was cold and arrogant. Tonight, he represented Prince Lian in supervising the battle, and his status was the most honorable. Hearing Dragon 2's order, the dozens of high-level divine lords on the mountain peak immediately flew into the sky and spread out, forming a line of defense. The remaining high-level divine lords all had honorable statuses. They all followed Dragon 2 into the night sky to meet the divine ship. Among these high-level divine lords, the one whose status was second only to Dragon 2 was the sect master of the Heavenly Unity sect's Raging Flame branch, Liang Jianqing. After all, He was the mainstay of the Heavenly Unity sect and one of Prince Lian's most trusted subordinates. The third person was the Imperial Guard's governor under the direct rule of the ruler, Yi Liang-en. In the army, these three were the strongest, having reached the 8th level of the Divine Lord realm. As for the 4 golden-armored generals, their status was second only to the Imperial Army governor. They were the pillars of the raging flame divine country, fierce generals who had gone through countless battles. They were titled the 4 Directions Divine Generals, and each of them commanded millions of troops. There were also 3 high deity sovereigns in strange attire. They were strange people who were raised by the monarch. They were known as the Starbreaker 3 Elders. It was said that these 3 eccentric experts came from the south of the Tianbei region. They were once powerful figures in an empire. But in the great changes 1,000 years ago, that empire disappeared, and they fled all the way north. Many years ago, the 3 Starbreakers had come to the Great Yang Empire and taken root in the Raging Flame Divine Nation. For some reason, the king of the Raging Flame country got acquainted with the 3 elders of the Star Shatterer Kingdom. Then, he took them into the royal palace and conferred them the title of Consecrator. The status of the 3 Starbreakers was second only to the Imperial Army Governor and the 4 Cardinal Divine Generals, much higher than those experts of the inner court. A total of 10 divine monarchs stood in a row in the night sky as they watched the divine battleship gradually approach. A moment later, the divine warship stopped in the night sky when it was still 100 miles away from the crowd. Shua. A white light flashed, and Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui, Blood Illusion God and the others appeared. Even Nai Feiyun followed behind Ji Tianxing. Only the left emissary Jin and the right emissary of the Blood Dragon stayed in the divine warship to control it. Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, Qian Yu and the Black Dragon also made preparations in the distorted space and time, ready to appear and join the battle at any time. The 2 sides faced each other in the night sky. Dragon 2 and the Imperial Army Governor led one side, and they had the advantage in numbers. As for Ji Tianxing, there were only a few people beside him. In comparison, they seemed very weak and pitiful. But no one dared to underestimate them. The expressions of Long Liang Jianqing, and Yi Liang were extremely serious. They were filled with vigilance. Ji Tianxing looked around and glanced at the 10 commanders and the 50 high deity sovereigns who had formed a line of defense. He couldn't help but shake his head. Why isn't Prince Lian here? Why is he hiding in the royal city to recuperate? Is he afraid that I'll kill him in an instant? He stared at Dragon 2, Liang Jianqing and Yi Liang with a dignified gaze as he asked in a low voice. Although his voice wasn't loud, it spread hundreds of miles and countless people heard it clearly. Many deity sovereigns felt a strong sense of anger and humiliation. Their fighting spirit and killing intent surged in their hearts. Dragon 2 stared at Ji Tianxing and said expressionlessly, "What kind of noble status does His Highness have? Why would he attack personally? You're not qualified to do so with your identity as a villain. Moreover, His Highness is planning from thousands of miles away. Sending us servants is more than enough to tear you to pieces." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and looked at Long seriously. Then, he said, "It seems that you're the leader of this motley crew. If I'm not wrong, you should be Prince Lian's most trusted aide, right?" Nai Feiyun, who was standing behind Ji Tianxing, saw Dragon 2's appearance and transmitted his voice to Ji Tianxing. "Young master, this person is called Dragon 2. His Prince Lian's personal bodyguard and his closest aide. In the past, Prince Lian's orders were mostly conveyed by Dragon 2. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly, indicating that he understood. At this time, Dragon 2's voice was as cold as a bell. "My identity isn't important. Everyone here tonight only has one identity. That is, a chivalrous person who upholds the good and punishes the evil on behalf of Tianxing. Tianxing, you're a demon who went on a killing spree in the Raging Flame Divine Kingdom and killed countless people. We come from all over the world and belong to different races and forces. Yet, we have to work together to kill you. Even the powerhouses of the Imperial Guard Corps have personally arrived. With so many of us besieging you, you should be honored to be buried here tonight." Dragon 2 clearly didn't want to reveal everyone's identities and origins, so he made up a dignified cover. Ji Tianxing and the others sneered, but they were too lazy to expose such a low-level lie. Ha ha ha. Last time, the people who threatened to kill me all died on Wolfhead Mountain. Tonight, the same thing happened again. I admire your courage. But it's a pity that you guys aren't enough to kill. Ji Tianxing sneered, shaking his head as he spoke. There was even some regret in his tone. These words thoroughly angered the 4 directions divine generals, the 3 starbreakers, and the 50 high divine lords. Everyone was filled with righteous indignation. They gnashed their teeth and cursed Ji Tianxing, angrily roaring. At this time, Heavenly Harmony Sect's sect master Liang Jianqing raised his palms, indicating for everyone to quiet down. He waved his hand and sent out several golden sword lights, which flew high into the sky. Soon, more than 10,000 elite experts appeared in the night sky from all directions. Among them, several thousand people were wearing standard armor. They were clearly the Imperial Guard Corps. There were also many people wearing the same robes and attire. They clearly came from various factions. These 13,000 over people's strength realm were all 8th level celestial deity realm and above. There were even 2,000 people whose strength reached the divine lord realm. So many elite experts formed a massive encirclement, sealing off a radius of 3,000 miles. Liang Jianqing stared at Ji Tianxing and said with a cold smile, "Brat, is it enough to kill you now?" Ji Tianxing's expression was indifferent as he shook his head again. Still not enough. Chapter 3162. Timpy. Arrogant to the extreme, Liang Jianqing frowned and snorted coldly. But Imperial Army Governor Yi Liangan was so angry that he started laughing. He pointed at the army in the night sky and sneered at Ji Tianxing. "Kid, we all know that you are very strong and that you have many tricks up your sleeves. However, open your eyes wide and take a good look at how elite and valiant this 13,000-strong army is. These soldiers are not like the motley crew of the 7 major sects. Plus, we have 60 high-level divine lords. Is it not enough to kill you? Even a spit from each of us can drown you." The 4 directions divine generals and the 3 star-breaking elders grinned coldly. The high-level divine lords in the night sky also chimed in. However, Ji Tianxing remained unmoved. With an indifferent expression, he said, "You've misheard. I'm not talking about whether these people can kill me. I am saying that these 13,000 people are not enough for me to kill. I'll give you one more chance. Let those who are hiding in the dark come at me together. If they don't act now, they won't have the chance when the battle starts." His tone was calm and he was not bluffing. However, the confidence and dominance in his words left countless divine lords dumbfounded. Their expressions turned particularly interesting. After a moment of silence, the crowd came back to their senses. They exploded with angry curses, excited shouts, and disdainful sneers. "Goddamned beast, your arrogance knows no bounds. This old man has lived for 20,000 years and has never seen such an arrogant and shameless person. Kid, do you really think you are a killing god? You think too highly of yourself. Tonight, we will end your undefeated legend and let you die without a burial place. Don't waste words with that bastard. Everyone, kill him. No matter the cost, we must burn his bones and scatter his ashes." Liang Jianqing, and Yi Liangan were already filled with humiliation and grief. Their bodies were bursting with anger and killing intent. Seeing that the soldiers were so agitated that they only wanted to attack, the 3 of them no longer hesitated. They waved their hands and gave the order to attack. Kill him. Soldiers, grind the bones of the bandits to dust. Tonight, we will make him pay with his blood." As the 3 of them roared, the 10,000-strong army, which had been ready to attack for a long time, suddenly couldn't hold back their murderous intent and charged forward without any regard for their own safety. "Kill. Brothers, charge. Kill the enemy and tear them to shreds. The monarch has decreed that whoever can chop off Tianxing's head will be conferred the title of Count and the title of Lord of a county. For the glory of Scandinavia, charge." In a split second, earth-shattering battle cries resounded in the night sky from all directions. As the many elite experts charged forward, the encirclement within a radius of 2,000 miles shrank rapidly. When the encirclement was narrowed to 500 to 600 miles, It would be the real close combat, the fiercest battle. The 10,000 plus elites were still charging forward, but the 50 high-level divine lords were the first to attack, using world-shaking divine abilities and ultimate skills. Sky Sea Raging Dragon Explosion, God-Slaying Sword in 10-step. 8-directional God-slaughtering Fist. Unparalleled Glass Palm, Waning Moon startles the heavens. The 50 high-level divine lords all used their ultimate killing moves with all their might. Instantly, a dazzling 5-colored divine light illuminated the night sky for thousands of miles. Divine abilities of various shapes and sizes, carrying with them an overwhelming murderous intent, rained down on Ji Tianxing and the others. The area became chaotic. Flames soared into the sky, thunder roared, lightning flashed, black clouds covered the sky, and hurricanes swept across. Faced with such a dangerous situation, Ji Tianxing and the others didn't panic, their expressions unchanged. After all, they were already mentally prepared. No matter how many enemies there were, no matter how loud their charge was, they had sufficient confidence in Ji Tianxing. As expected, Ji Tianxing also made a prompt decision to attack. He formed a divine seal with both hands and used the heaven-destroying sword array, instantly connecting with the stars in the sky. Instantly, 25,000 streaks of starlight appeared in the pitch-black sky, raining down like a meteor shower. Those were 25,000 giant divine swords formed from the power of the stars in the sky, containing a divine might and sword intent that could suppress everything. Ji Tianxing kept waving his hands, using divine Dao laws, adding dozens of nomological powers to the divine swords in the sky. Thus, when the 10,000 giant swords descended above their heads, they became even more extraordinarily powerful and indestructible. Swish, swish, swish. In a short span of time, the 25,000 giant divine swords enveloped an area of 1,000 miles, forming a giant sword net. Thousands of giant swords danced in the sky, releasing the most dazzling light. The divine abilities used by the 50 high-level divine lords were intercepted by the giant swords just as they reached the heads of Ji Tianxing and the others. Rumble. Boom. Crack. Bam. 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 The giant swords clashed with the divine abilities, creating a deafening explosion that reverberated between heaven and earth. Countless divine abilities exploded, but the giant swords in the sky were unharmed. The shockwaves from the explosion carried with them countless fragments of divine light, spreading out in all directions. Ji Tianxing and the others were the closest, so they bore the brunt of the impact. People like Bai Long and Zhen Hong were weaker, so they were easily injured by the shockwaves. But Ji Tianxing was prepared. His body lit up with dazzling golden light, forming a giant shield that protected everyone within. No matter how the shockwaves struck, the golden shield was undamaged, and everyone was safe and sound. Just like that, the first round of attacks from the 50 high-level divine lords was easily neutralized by Ji Tianxing. The 10 commanders and the 50 high-level divine lords were all dumbfounded, shocked and incredulous. This is the divine ability that he is best at, the one that is widely known, heavenly punishment. Lian frowned as he looked at the situation, his expression grave. Liang Jianqing nodded and said solemnly, back then, when he was dealing with the various sects, he used this move. Everyone knows that this divine ability sword formation is very powerful and can kill everything. But no one can break this sword formation, nor can they block the attacks of the sword formation. Imperial Army Governor Yi Liang frowned and thought for a while. Then he said solemnly, this bastard used the sword formation to seal off an area of 1,000 miles, trapping all of us in the sword formation. Could it be that he wants to use this heavenly punishment sword formation to kill all 13,000 of us? Lian nodded and did not speak. Yi Liang and the Four Directions Divine General's expressions changed drastically. They could not help but exclaim, this is impossible. How can there be a monarch-level divine formation in the world that can kill 13,000 elite experts? Perhaps only the legendary king-level divine formation can do that. That bastard is not a divine king, so how can he kill all of us? No one answered his question. Everyone's mood was very heavy. At this moment, the heaven-destroying sword formation was completely formed, and it sped up. 10,000 giant swords sealed off the area, forming a sword net. The other 15,000 giant swords crisscrossed in the air for thousands of miles, attacking the army. Chapter 3163. Under the bombardment of tens of thousands of swords, the world was in chaos, completely filled with sword light. The more than 10,000 elite experts were drowned by the sword lights before they could even use their divine spells to attack Ji Tianxing. Swish, 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 swish. Sharp piercing sounds continued to burst out. Under the attack of the 10,000 swords, blood splattered all over the sky. Those who were struck, pierced, or swept by the giant divine sword would have their limbs severed, while those who were heavily injured would explode into a rain of blood. For a moment, shrill screams and cries of near death, as well as angry curses, could be heard from all directions. In just 2 breaths of time, hundreds and thousands of experts had died tragically under the sword light, dying without a complete corpse. What was even more terrifying was that each of the giant swords seemed to have a life of their own as they slashed towards places with a lot of people. Tens of sword lights gathered together and formed a hurricane of sword blades, sweeping across the night sky without any fear. Anyone who was touched by the sword blade hurricane would be seriously injured even if they didn't die. Its power was terrifying. The army that had been full of confidence a moment ago was instantly stunned. Every single one of them was trembling with fear. Their hearts were filled with fear as they dodged and fled in panic. The attacking formation of the army was messed up, and a gap appeared in the huge encirclement. The morale of the army plummeted. Even though many lower and middle divine lords tried their best to block the giant sword and buy time for the heavenly gods to catch their breaths. However, this was futile. The might of each sword was comparable to an attack from a high divine lord. Those low-level and middle-level divine lords could not withstand the might of the enormous sword at all. Just like that, the 13,000-strong army was gradually routed, and their numbers quickly dwindled. They were still able to maintain their formation. Even though they were from the same faction, they risked their lives to gather together and work together to block the giant sword's attack. More than 10,000 people were divided into more than 30 groups, each fighting on their own without any order. Seeing this, Lian Liang Zhenqing, and Yi Liang and all frowned, their expressions turning even uglier. The problem that I was most worried about has finally appeared. The Lian face was very dark. He sighed and said in a low voice, "I already guessed it. Although these 13,000 people are elites, they come from different forces. They have not been trained or worked together, so there is no tacit understanding. It would be fine if he won the battle and sang loudly all the way. If there is an emergency, it will be a mess like now." Liang Zhenqing cursed as he blocked the giant swords. This sword formation covers 1,000 miles, and there are at least tens of thousands of giant swords. Why is the power of each giant sword so strong? Even we, high divine lords, are in a perilous situation. The slightest bit of carelessness and we will be injured by the enormous sword. It was easy to imagine how those 13,000 people would be able to withstand the attack of the giant sword. How did that despicable bastard Tianxing master such a terrifying skill? Yi Liang was full of worry as he said in a low voice, "Sirs, the battle has just begun and the situation is already so dangerous. We can't just watch and do nothing. We have to take action. Only we can stop Tianxing. Even if we can't kill him, we can at least suppress him." The red-haired old monster of the 3 Starbreaker elders grinned coldly and said, "Commander Yi, it's easy for you to say. We have already done our best to block the attack of the 10,000 swords. How can we suppress that bastard?" The other old monster with purple hair and the appearance of a 10-year-old child said in a strange tone, "The battle has just begun. Only 1,000 people have died, and you are already so panicked. If you feel so sorry for those trash, how about we just surrender? Let's see if that bastard Tianxing will let us go." These two people's words were quite harsh. Not only did they make Yi Liang's expression turn ugly, but the 4 divine generals also showed anger. It seemed that they were about to start arguing and fighting among themselves. At this moment, the Lian said in a dignified tone, "Cut the crap. Everyone has signed a military order for this operation. Either we die here or return victorious. No one can avoid it. The army's morale is weak. If this continues, they will definitely be defeated. Everyone, follow me." Do your best to restrain Tianxing." After saying that, the Lian took out 2 sabers and charged at Ji Tianxing. Liang Jianqing and Yi Liang did not hesitate. They each took out their divine weapons and charged with the Lian. Immediately after, the 4 divine generals also braved the sword rain and charged at Ji Tianxing without any regard for their own safety. Only the 3 Starbreaker elders remained where they were, stunned for a moment. The 3 of them looked at each other and revealed helpless expressions. They could only brace themselves and attack. When the 10 commanders charged in front of Ji Tianxing, they realized that Ji Tianxing and the others were fighting with many high-level divine lords in the sword rain. Of the 50 high-level divine lords, more than 30 were still blocking the sword rain and assisting the army in attacking. Only a dozen or so of them charged near Ji Tianxing and attacked from 100 miles away, creating pressure for Ji Tianxing and the others. Ji Tianxing controlled the heaven-destroying sword formation to attack the army while casting spells to block the attacks. Lin Shui, Blood Illusion, Zhen Hong, White Dragon, and the others stayed within Ji Tianxing's golden light shield and fought with the high-level divine lords around them. Even Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, Qian Yu, and Black Dragon left 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda and joined the battle. They were all beside Ji Tianxing and were protected by the golden light shield. They used all kinds of divine powers and supreme skills to attack with all their might. Those high-level divine lords could not break the golden light shield at all, nor could they hurt Ji Tianxing and the others. Instead, it was the counterattacks of Ji Tianxing and the others that gave them a lot of pressure. They blocked the attacks of the giant swords and neutralized the divine powers of Ji Tianxing and the others. Soon, they showed signs of defeat and were all injured. Fortunately, Lian, Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang and the others arrived in time and joined the battle. The 4 Directions divine generals and the 3 Starbreakers also surrounded Ji Tianxing and the others and attacked. The 10 commanders all used their divine powers and supreme skills and released all kinds of powerful killing moves. They attacked Ji Tianxing and the others like a flood. Suddenly, the pressure on Ji Tianxing and the others increased greatly. Cracks appeared on the golden light shield and it was in danger. As a result, the pressure on the high-level divine lords was greatly reduced. They hurriedly retreated a distance and took the opportunity to suppress their injuries and consume elixirs. Soon, 30 breaths of time passed. Ji Tianxing's golden light shield finally couldn't hold on any longer and exploded with a loud bang. Crack! The golden light shield shattered into pieces and scattered in the night sky. Without the protection of the shield, Lin Shui, Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, and the others were in an extremely dangerous situation. Seeing this, Lian, Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang and the others were overjoyed. They became more spirited and attacked even more crazily. At the critical moment, Ji Tianxing made a decision and took out the Jiutian Tenju Tower. Swish! The divine tower instantly expanded to 10,000 feet tall and released a mysterious black light that sucked everyone in. Only Ji Tianxing was left outside the divine tower. The attacks of the high-level divine lords landed on the divine tower and made a deafening sound, but it was not effective. Chapter 3164. The divine technique light that blotted out the sky, as well as the light of various mystical abilities, were unable to break through the divine tower's defenses. Ji Tianxing also used Endless Sky of Chaos, his body becoming transparent and blurry. The ultimate killing moves of numerous divine lords passed through him without any delay, scattering between heaven and earth, but he was completely unharmed. Seeing this scene, Lian, Liang Jianqing, and the others were stunned again, revealing expressions of disbelief and anger. Damn it! Our divine abilities and consummate skills actually passed through his body. Are our eyes playing tricks on us? He's actually completely unharmed. This is too strange. Damn beast, what sorcery did he use? And that divine tower, it's protecting everyone, we must destroy it. That black tower's aura is very mysterious, it's definitely not an ordinary monarch-level divine artifact, everyone must be careful. That little beast's strength is already ridiculously strong, and he grasps this kind of mystical ability, how are we going to kill him? Such a strange mystical ability, who knows how long it can last? If it lasts for 15 minutes, it's still fine, but if he can last for 2 hours, then we'll be doomed. Everyone cried out in alarm, reminding each other to deal with it carefully. Especially the three elders Poxing, they were even more worried and anxious. Liang Jianking's expression was dignified as he shouted coldly, "What are you all so anxious for? The facts have proven that our joint attack has already caused great pressure on that brat. He's strong, but that group of people around him are all trash, and they still need his protection. Now that that group of people have all hidden in the Black Tower, only that brat is left to fight alone. How long can he last? As long as we continue to attack and put pressure on him, he won't be able to control the sword formation. At that time, the sword formation's power will weaken, and an army of 10,000 will charge over, and his doomsday will come." After Liang Jianking's analysis, the surrounding Divine Lord powerhouses were much more relieved. Especially the other 30 or so Divine Lords. Another dozen or so people charged through the sword rain, charging near the Black Tower. In this way, the number of Divine Lords besieging Ji Tianxing reached as many as 42, although many were already injured, and their battle prowess had weakened. However, they had so many people besieging Ji Tianxing. Of course, their morale was high, and they were full of confidence. Yi Liang and also shouted in high spirits, everyone saw it. Previously, they were all talking about him as if he was a god, blowing that kid up to the sky. But in reality, no matter how powerful he is, he can only passively defend against us. Let's continue to attack and put more pressure on him. We'll be able to kill him soon. The Lian didn't say much. He waved his hand domineeringly and ordered, "Kill." Thus, the 42 High Divine Lords attacked together, unleashing powerful divine abilities and killing moves that rained down on Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing sat cross-legged in the night sky, his hands forming a divine spell as he focused on controlling the heaven-destroying sword formation. He even ignored the divine light that blotted out the sun above his head. Swoosh! Swish swish swish! Divine abilities and supreme skills passed through him without any obstruction, scattering between heaven and earth without causing any ripples. A portion of the divine abilities and killing moves landed on the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda, exploding with earth-shattering sounds. However, they were useless. The divine pagoda stood motionless in the night sky, its surface covered with a layer of mysterious black light that made it indestructible. Although their attacks were useless, they weren't able to put any pressure on Ji Tianxing. Lian Liang Jianqing, and the others were full of confidence, and they continued to attack without stopping. Time passed by slowly. In 20 breaths of time, they had launched more than 10 attacks. The result was, without a doubt, completely useless. Ji Tianxing was still sitting in the night sky, focused on controlling the sword formation, completely unaffected. Finally, the 3 Starbreakers realized that something was wrong. This is bad. The situation is bad. Everyone, look. The sword formation seems to have become stronger again. Our army of more than 10,000, how come there are only so few people left? Lian Liang Jianqing, and the others were all focused on Ji Tianxing, ignoring the surrounding army. Hearing the exclamations of the 3 Starbreakers, everyone was startled awake. They turned their heads to look around, and only then did they realize that something was wrong. Within 100 li, the number and power of the giant swords were the same as before, there was no change. However, beyond 100 li, the giant swords that filled the sky became dazzling with rainbow colors, releasing sword energy that blotted out the sky and created countless swordlight hurricanes. The power of those giant divine swords was clearly twice as strong as before. Moreover, the power of laws contained in the giant swords had doubled. Looking around, there were swordlight hurricanes and sword rain in all directions, and they couldn't see anyone else at all. Even the screams and battle cries of the army had become indistinct, and couldn't be heard clearly. Lian Liang Jianqing, and the others immediately frowned, their expressions changing. So much time has passed, why hasn't the army charged over yet? Damn it! That bastard is stalling for time, toying with us while increasing his strength to slaughter our army. What a treacherous bastard! He wants to stop the army from surrounding and wantonly slaughter our army before finally dealing with us. Reality was just as everyone had expected. The swordlight and hurricanes that blotted out the sky obscured the surrounding scene. However, when everyone used their divine senses to observe, they could see the wretched scene on the battlefield. The powerful swordlight and hurricanes that filled the sky were like raging waves, wildly swallowing up the surrounding army. Previously, the army had 12,000 people, divided into 30-some groups. But now, the army was left with only 9,000 or so, with only 20 groups remaining. Wherever the swordlight and hurricanes passed, batch after batch of elite experts and low-level divine lords would be ground to dust, blood flying everywhere. Only those mid-level divine lords could barely last a few rounds before their divine bodies were ground to pieces by the swordlight. While everyone was observing the battlefield, another 400-some people had died tragically to the swordlight. Lian Liang Jianqing, and the others had seen through Ji Tianxing's goal and were so angry that their eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. That damned bastard, he's a devil, an executioner. What are you all still standing around for? Go help the army block the sword array. Anyway, that kid used a divine ability and became transparent and blurry. We can't hurt him either. Why waste time with him? Yes. Let's ignore him and go rescue the army. Let's see what he can do. The few commanders exchanged a few words and decided on a plan. However, the three elders Poxing raised an objection. We finally surrounded him with great difficulty. Are we really going to split up? Everyone, don't forget that the initiative is in that kid's hands. He's transparent now, but after we split up and go rescue the army, what if he returns to normal? He's slaughtering the army now. When we go rescue the army, he'll return to normal and kill us one by one. At that time, it'll be too difficult for us to gather together again. Hearing the three elders Poxing's words, the few commanders were also stunned for a moment, their faces revealing difficult expressions. Even the backbone of the group, Lian was hesitant. He sighed with a bitter expression and said, "Sigh, we're in a dilemma." Chapter 3165. The initiative was in Ji Tianxing's hands. The Lian Liang Jianqing, and the others were in a very passive situation. They could neither advance nor retreat. But Ji Tianxing was still slaughtering the army, and it was only getting more and more intense. As time passed, batch after batch of elite experts were reduced to a bloody mist by the sword lights and gales. The Lian and the others could not sit by and do nothing. They had to think of a way to resolve this situation. It was impossible to suppress or stop Ji Tianxing. No matter how they attacked, they could not affect Ji Tianxing. The only solution was to block the sword formation's power and protect the army around them. The Lian only hesitated for a few seconds before decisively making his decision. Protect the army with all your strength and block the sword formation's power. As his voice fell, the expressions and eyes of many higher divine lords dimmed. They all thought to themselves that they had known this would be the result. In the end, they still had to sacrifice themselves to protect the army. But they all knew that this was their only choice. They had to protect the army and work together with the army to block the sword formation's attack. The longer they could last, the greater their chances of victory. Once the sword formation's power weakened or when Ji Tianxing could no longer maintain his transparent state, they would have a chance to turn the tide. Swish. The Lian was the first to retreat, flying toward a nearby group of elites. He brandished his two sabers and sent out saber images to block the sword formation's attack. This group of elites had more than 400 people. 90% of them were celestial gods, and only 30-some were divine lords. 6 mid-level divine lords and more than 20 low-level divine lords used all their strength to block the sword light and protect more than 400 experts. But the effect was minimal. They simply could not block the sword rain, and all of them were heavily injured. In just 100 seconds, more than half of the celestial gods had died, and 10 lower god lords had died. Even 3 middle god lords had been killed. This group of people was in despair. Their will to fight had completely disappeared, and they began to think of surrendering and fleeing. Fortunately, the Liana rushed over and helped them block the majority of the sword lights, greatly reducing the pressure on them. The rate at which this group of people died had clearly decreased by half. Only then did they recover and calm down a lot. Under the leadership of several middle-level divine lords, they joined forces to form a battle formation. They worked together to form a protective shield that blocked the sword rain that filled the sky. Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang'an, and the dozens of higher divine lords were relieved when they saw that Lian had taken the lead in rescuing the army and that the results were obvious. Everyone no longer hesitated and flew in all directions to rescue the army that had fallen into a desperate situation. Liang Jianqing, Yi Liangan, the 4 directions god generals and the 3 elders Poxing were all 8th stage realm upper level god monarchs, and their abilities were the strongest. They could act alone and protect a team of 300 to 500 people. The other high divine lords did not have that kind of ability, so they formed groups of 2 or 3 and joined forces to protect a group. Very quickly, the various high divine lords finished their assignments. More than 50 high divine lords could only protect 26 teams, which was around 7,000 people. The remaining 8 teams, about 2,000 people, were all at the edge of the battlefield, far away. The numerous high divine lords were unable to take care of these people and could only resign themselves to fate. Very quickly, the difference became very obvious. Those 8 teams of 2,000 people only lasted for half an hour in the sword formation before they were all slaughtered. As for those 26 teams, they had the protection of many high divine lords, so the casualty rate was obviously much lower. After half an hour, only 1,000 people were seriously injured or dead. The battle situation had developed to this stage and was gradually stabilizing and easing up. Although Prince Lian's army had lost more than half and was only left with about 6,000 people, they still managed to stabilize themselves. They were no longer flustered and helpless. Their fighting spirit and confidence had recovered by quite a bit. They all had reason to believe that as long as they continued to persevere, the first person who could not hold on would definitely be Ji Tianqing, whereas this army of theirs was like sand being washed away by the waves. Those who were left were all elites and true battle-hardened soldiers. Seeing that the power of the heaven-punishing sword formation had reached its peak, it was very difficult to raise it any further. Lian, Liang Jianqing, Yi Liangan and the others had other thoughts. They protected several teams and slowly brought them closer to the center of the sword formation. Lian's thoughts were very clear. He wanted to gather the army to the center of the sword formation and work together to kill Ji Tianqing. The other high divine lords also understood Lian's intentions. Thus, they also did their best to protect the various teams and gradually rushed to the center of the sword formation. Seeing that the 26 teams were all slowly moving closer to Ji Tianqing, his situation gradually became more and more dangerous. According to the speed of the various teams, they would be able to complete the encirclement in at most 15 minutes. At that time, the 26 teams would work together to block the sword rain and surround Ji Tianqing, and he would be powerless to reverse the situation. Of course, this was only what everyone was thinking. They simply could not imagine that Ji Tianqing was invincible below the Divine King level. He could use infinite sky of chaos for long periods of time and maintain a transparent state, becoming one with the world. Whether it was 6 to 10 hours or a day, this army would not be able to harm him. But he did not want to do that and stall for time with Lian and the others. Even if the 26 teams surrounded him, they would not be able to injure him. But if the army worked together to block the sword formation's attack, the effect would be more significant, and the rate of casualties would be further reduced. Originally, Ji Tianqing might only need 2 hours to end this battle and slaughter the army. If the 26 teams were to surround him, it would take him 4 hours, 6 hours, or even 10 hours to finish the battle. This place was very close to the raging flame royal city, and the longer the battle dragged on, the more variables there would be. Ending the battle quickly was the right way. Thus, Ji Tianqing ended the infinite sky of chaos state and his body returned to normal. He no longer controlled the heaven-destroying sword formation and allowed it to operate on its own. Under such circumstances, the power of the sword formation would be halved, but he did not need to divert his attention to control the sword formation and could focus on dealing with Lian and the others. Whoosh! A white light flashed. Ji Tianqing instantly teleported 800 miles and appeared behind a team. He clenched his left hand into a fist and punched out a mountain-sized dragon-elephant phantom, while his right hand swung the burial of heaven and slashed out a giant sword that was 10,000 meters long. There were only 200 people left in this team, and most of them were injured and covered in blood. They looked very wretched. 3 high-level divine lords worked together to protect this team. They were constantly breaking through the sword light blockade and rushing toward the center of the sword formation. They did not expect Ji Tianxing to suddenly attack. When the dragon elephant phantom arrived and the giant sword descended, it was too late for this team to dodge. Boom! There was a deafening sound as the dragon elephant phantom struck the crowd and blasted a huge hole in the formation. At least 40 experts were blasted into pieces by the dragon elephant divine fist and exploded into a bloody mist. Then, the giant sword that was 10,000 meters long slashed down and split the team in two. 2 mid-level divine lords, 4 low-level divine lords, and more than 50 divine realm experts were also blasted into pieces by the giant sword and died on the spot. Chapter 3166. In the blink of an eye, the number of people in this team was reduced by nearly half. Such berserk power caused the others to be extremely alarmed, subconsciously retreating and fleeing. Only at this time did the other teams realize that the situation was not good. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was no longer in the center of the sword formation and started killing the army, and destroying heaven and earth the moment he attacked, the various teams were filled with grief, indignation, and shock. Under the lead of many high-rank divine lords, the various teams gathered at a faster speed. They were very smart and did not rescue this team that was attacked, nor did they charge at Ji Tianxing. Because they knew that it was all futile. They could not stop Ji Tianxing at all. The most sensible thing to do was for all the teams to gather as soon as possible. At that time, it would not be so easy for Ji Tianxing to kill them again. Ji Tianxing naturally understood this point as well. Therefore, his mood was also very urgent, speeding up the pace of his attack. Starry River Break. Ji Tianxing gave a cold cry, holding the sword of burial of heaven with both hands, slashing out a resplendent sword light that was 100 miles long. The sword light was like a starry river, sweeping across the night sky, engulfing the entire team. Only to hear muffled bangs continuously erupting. The 100 or so elites who were lucky enough to survive were reduced to ashes on the spot. Even the 3 high-rank divine lords protecting this team had their divine bodies destroyed by the starry sword, fleeing into the distance with only their divine sparks remaining. Ji Tianxing did not pursue. In any case, those 3 divine sparks could not escape the sword formation and were destined to fall here. He teleported another 300 miles and appeared above another team. That team had more than 300 people, protected by 2 high-rank divine lords, still desperately rushing toward the center of the sword formation, wanting to join up with the other teams. After Ji Tianxing appeared, his right hand waved the sword and stabbed out several hundred light blades, instantly killing more than 60 elites. His left palm accumulated 100% power, striking out a mountain-sized golden dragon palm, ruthlessly smashing into the crowd. Only to hear a loud boom explode. The crowd was smashed into pieces. Another 100 elites exploded and died, turning into a bloody mist that filled the sky. Ji Tianxing only used 2 moves to kill more than half of the team. Such a terrifying might caused the remaining people to be horrified. They let out terrified roars and fled in all directions in panic. However, those fleeing elites were quickly turned into dregs by the sword rain that filled the sky. The dozen over divine lord powerhouses that were lucky enough to survive were also caught up by Ji Tianxing and killed one by one. After dealing with this team, Ji Tianxing rushed towards another team and used the same trick to deal with more than 200 elites. Even though that group also had 2 high-level divine lords protecting them, they were practically useless. Ji Tianxing only used 3 breaths of time to execute 4 divine abilities and consummate skills to wipe out the entire team. Even the 2 high divine lords protecting that team were killed by him on the spot, their godheads shattered. Following that, he continuously killed one team after another, sweeping away all obstacles, no one able to stop him. Seeing this scene, Lian Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang, and the rest all felt chills all over their bodies, filled with despair. Damn it! The other teams can't withstand his charge at all. Oh, Hao Tian! How can that beast be strong to such an extent? Just who can deal with him? Everyone, speed up. We have to gather no matter the cost. Only by gathering together can we resist him. Otherwise, we'll only be killed off one by him. The Starbreaker 3 elders were also busy until they were drenched in sweat, their appearances very wretched. Seeing Ji Tianxing wreaking havoc everywhere, continuously exterminating one team after another, the three people all started roaring with a bellyful of indignation. We said before previously that we absolutely can't split up. We'll definitely be defeated one by one. You guys still didn't believe it. Do you believe it now? The initiative is in his hands. We're in a passive position from start to finish. Previously, the army had 1,000 to 2,000 people killed, and you guys were in a hurry to rescue them. Now, more than half of the army has been lost. Soon, the entire army will be wiped out. Are you satisfied? You don't listen to the advice of your elders, and you'll be at a disadvantage soon. This old man reminded you before. It's your fault for being so obstinate, resulting in this situation. The Starbreaker 3 elders' complaints made everyone even more vexed. The elites of the various teams were already at a loss for what to do and were filled with shock. When they heard the Starbreaker 3 elders' words, they were even more terrified and despaired. Their fighting spirit collapsed. Finally, 15 minutes passed. Lian Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang, and the rest covered the various teams and completed the encirclement at the center of the sword formation. Only 12 teams were able to successfully arrive, and there were only about 3,000 people. As for the other 14 teams, close to 3,000 elites, they were all wiped out by Ji Tianxing. The 12 teams that were lucky enough to survive all appeared very panicked and anxious. After gathering, Lian Liang Jianqing, and the rest hurriedly commanded everyone to form a battle formation and work together to conjure up a shield. In order to protect everyone, Lian and Yi Liang even took out a few high-grade divine artifacts. But all of this was futile. After Ji Tianxing finished off the 14 teams, he turned and flew to the center of the sword formation and began to deal with Lian Liang Jianqing, and the rest. More than 40 high-level divine lords and 3,000 elites worked together to form a super-large battle formation and conjure up 3 layers of divine light shields. But Ji Tianxing was not worried at all. He methodically controlled the heaven-vanquishing sword formation to attack this battle formation. A total of 15,000 giant swords were concentrated in this area of 100 miles, bombarding the 5-colored light shield indiscriminately. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh whoosh! Boom! Boom 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 boom! More than 10,000 giant swords rained down like a torrential rain, fiercely striking the 5-colored light shield and exploding with deafening sounds. Instantly, the divine light shield within 100 miles trembled incessantly from the bombardment and was on the verge of collapse. The battle formation formed by 3,000 people was also on the verge of collapse and was in a perilous situation. In a short span of 10 breaths, the outermost layer of the divine light shield was smashed to pieces with cracking sounds. The expressions of Lian Liang Jianqing, and the 3,000 elites changed dramatically, revealing looks of anxiety and fear. Soon, another span of 10 breaths passed. The second layer of light shield formed by the 3,000 people was also smashed to pieces. The last layer of light shield seemed exceptionally weak and powerless. The 3,000 elites revealed looks of despair and extreme grief. Boom 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 boom! The 15,000 giant swords once again launched a barrage of attacks, exploding with deafening booms that shook the heavens. In less than 10 breaths, the third layer of light shield was also smashed, sending billions of shards flying everywhere. At this point, the 3,000 elites had lost the protection of the light shield and were exposed to the rain of swords. When the endless giant swords rained down, everyone revealed a look of despair and let out unwilling roars. Boom boom boom! The next moment, the rain of swords enveloped the battle formation and drowned the 3,000 elites. The high-quality divine artifacts of Lian Liang Jianqing, and the others were immediately smashed to pieces. The huge battle formation was also torn apart, and a huge gap appeared. At least 400 people were smashed to pieces and turned to dust under the first wave of the rain of swords. But this was only the beginning of the disaster. Chapter 3167. They watched as batch after batch of elite disciples disappeared under the onslaught of the huge swords that filled the sky. The Lian Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang, and the others were so angry that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They knew that with their strength, they could not protect the 3,000 elites. The more passive they were, the more desperate they would be and the more they would die. If they went all out and fought back, they might still have a chance at survival. Everyone, give up on defending and attack with me. Even if we die here, we will not allow ourselves to be slaughtered. Lian raised his arms and shouted loudly, fiercely strengthening his heart. His tone was full of solemn and stirring feeling. Dozens of high-level divine lords resonated with him, feeling the same way as he did. They all opened their mouths in agreement. As for the 2,000 elites, they had basically been abandoned. In the heaven-vanquishing sword formation, they had no ability to protect themselves or fight back. So it did not matter what they did. Kill. Everyone, let's charge together. Even if we die, we have to drag him down with us. The Lian, Liang Jianqing, and the others roared at the top of their lungs. More than 40 upper divine lords and more than 100 middle divine lords followed them, brandishing their swords and sabers as they charged at Ji Tianxing through the rain of swords. Yet, Ji Tianxing used the same trick again and ignored everyone's attacks. He used the infinite sky of turbidity secret technique and became one with the world, his body becoming transparent. More than 100 divine lord experts released divine powers that blotted out the sun. They passed through him without any resistance and scattered across the world, unable to harm him at all. Instead, he focused on controlling the sword formation, releasing its strongest power and quickly slaughtering the 2,000 elites. Many lower divine lords and celestial god experts exploded one after another under the dense rain of giant swords, turning into a bloody mist. 2,500, 2,200, 1,800, 1,500, 1,200. As time passed, the number of people on the battlefield rapidly decreased and the bloody mist in the night sky became thicker and thicker. Soon, 100 breaths of time passed. The number of lower divine lords and heavenly gods had decreased to around 300. All of them were covered in blood and did not look like humans anymore. Lian, Liang Jianqing, and more than 40 high divine lords had used all their strength to besiege Ji Tianxing for so long, but to no avail. Everyone was in complete despair. The Lian and many of the higher divine lords gave up on attacking and focused on defending against the sword rain. An army of 13,000 was completely annihilated by him. He single-handedly slaughtered more than 10,000 soldiers, and he was completely unharmed. There has never been such a monster in the Great Yang Empire in the past 10,000 years. He is not a divine monarch. He was definitely an unparalleled divine king. Apart from divine king powerhouses, who else can be so heaven-defying? Why is this happening? We have more than 10,000 elites, and we have prepared for so long. Why are we still defeated? Hee. We're all going to die here. None of us will survive. If he doesn't give us a way out, then let's perish together. Many of the higher divine lords roared and cursed angrily, and they sneered in despair. Many of them had even made up their minds to self-detonate and perish together with Ji Tianxing. Of course, this was just their wishful thinking. There were still more than 300 people alive. If they self-detonated, they might not be able to kill Ji Tianxing, but they would definitely blow up all their companions. And at this time, Ji Tianxing also stopped attacking. Under the control of his mind, those 15,000 giant swords floated in the night sky, arranged in a sword formation and as dense as rain. The tips of the swords were all pointed downwards, pointing at the 300 or so lucky survivors. The formless sword intent locked onto everyone's auras, causing them to feel chills all over as they were enveloped by the cold air of death. Ji Tianxing looked down at Lian, Liang Jianqing, and the others, and said expressionlessly, "Now that things have come to this, you've already lost. What's the point of fighting like cornered beasts?" Hearing this, the 3 Starbreakers immediately sneered. "Brat, we admit that you're very strong and unfathomable. We've lost, but we have to die with dignity. Don't even think about humiliating us. You bastard, we'll fight to the last moment and shed our last drop of blood. Are you trying to persuade us to surrender? Stop dreaming. Even if we surrender, you won't let us go. Since we're going to die either way, we'd rather die with dignity." On the surface, the 3 Starbreakers sounded like they were unyielding and full of sorrow. But Ji Tianxing frowned and sneered disdainfully. "You 3 long-haired freaks have long since grown timid and want to surrender and run, but you're pretending to be righteous. How laughable. Having their intentions exposed, the 3 Starbreakers immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation and began to curse. Ji Tianxing couldn't be bothered to pay attention to them. In any case, the 3 Starbreakers were already dead in his eyes. His gaze fell on Lian and Liang Zhenqing, and he said expressionlessly, "Of the 2 of you, one is Prince Lian's trusted aide, and the other is the sect master of the Heavenly Harmony sect and the Raging Flame branch. Everyone else has to die, but the 2 of you. As long as you surrender, this Lord can spare your lives." Suddenly hearing these words, the 40+ High Divine Lords and the 300+ elites all revealed expressions of shock, jealousy, anger, and unwillingness. Many people were roaring in their hearts. Why do you want to kill us but let the 2 of them go? No matter how unresigned they were, they also understood the reason. Lian and Liang Zhenqing had special statuses. To Ji Tianxing, they still had some value. As for the others, they were like ants. If he killed them, then so be it. The 40+ High Divine Lords and the 300+ elites were thus sentenced to death. The outcome was irreversible. They knew that they would undoubtedly die, so they dispelled all their delusions and extravagant hopes. With the mentality of perishing together, they instead became even more united, their wills as strong as an impregnable fortress. When Lian and Liang Zhenqing heard Ji Tianxing's words, they didn't become excited. Instead, they righteously berated, "Dog thief, don't even think about sowing discord. We live and die together, advance and retreat together. Bastard. Don't even think about using us to threaten and murder the young prince. Even if we die, we won't fall into your hands, and we definitely won't cause trouble for the young prince." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and sneered, "The 2 of you are rather loyal, but I don't know if it's true or false. How about this? This lord will kill the others first, then have a good chat with the 2 of you." Hearing these words, the other 300+ people became even more indignant, so angry that they almost vomited blood. Everyone was thinking that they were still alive, so Lian and Liang Zhenqing pretended to be very loyal, righteously refusing to surrender. Once Ji Tianxing killed them all, Lian and Liang Zhenqing wouldn't have to worry about anything. They would definitely surrender without any dignity. For a moment, the 300+ people glared angrily at Lian and Liang Zhenqing, developing hostility towards them. Whether it was because of jealousy, hatred, or unwillingness, this group of people was divided. Lian was so angry that he almost vomited blood. He could only use death to show his sincerity and recklessly charge at Ji Tianxing. "Dog thief, I'll fight you to the death." Chapter 3168. The Lian led the army this time as a representative of Prince Lian and shouldered a heavy responsibility. The others could admit defeat and surrender, but he could not. If he surrendered to Ji Tianxing, he would be trampling on Prince Lian's face. Since he couldn't win, the Lian would rather die in battle, and he wanted to die tragically and heroically. This way, even if he died, Prince Lian would confer him a posthumous title and reward him, and treat his family well. If he surrendered and survived, the fate of his family could be imagined. Given Prince Lian's personality, he would definitely execute his entire family to vent his hatred and resentment. "Bastard, die." The Lian transformed into a streak of light that pierced through the night sky, charging in front of Ji Tianxing and slashing down with his twin sabers. "You're courting death." Ji Tianxing frowned slightly, then expressionlessly raised his right hand and swept out with his sword. It was just a casual sweep of the sword, seemingly without any order. But his attainments in the sword Dao had long reached the pinnacle. Every move he made contained the true intent of the sword Dao and the power of multiple laws. Boom! With a dull explosion, the 2 dazzling saber lights exploded into pieces. The Lian was also sent flying, vomiting blood as he crashed 100 miles away. Even though Ji Tianxing was the same as him, both being 8th level Divine Lord realm strength. But the difference in their combat strength was huge, at least 10 times greater. Even if the Lian used all his strength, he could not block Ji Tianxing's casual strike. Seeing the Lian sent flying with a single move and heavily injured, everyone trembled with fear, chills running down their spines. The dozens of high-rank Divine Lords were all pondering. The Lian and Liang Zhenqing were the strongest among them, but they could not block a single move from Ji Tianxing. If it were them, they would probably be insta-killed by Ji Tianxing. As a result, many high-rank divine lords were nervous. But the Lian had already attacked. They could not just stand there and watch, so they could only brace themselves and charge. Kill. Everyone, attack together. I would rather die standing than live kneeling. Liang Jianqing and Yi Liangen both roared loudly. With hearts full of solemn and stirring feelings, they launched an attack on Ji Tianxing. The two of them attacked from the left and right, brandishing their divine swords and using their ultimate killing moves. Limitless sword ripple. Sky-splitting sun chop. Even though the two of them had given it their all and unleashed their strongest killing moves, the two of them were unable to stop each other. The giant sword that was thousands of feet long and had hundreds of dazzling sword lights. Its power was indeed astonishing. However, their sword Dao divine abilities paled in comparison to Ji Tianxing's. Ji Tianxing put his left hand behind his back and held the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand. In an instant, 36 sword lights shot out. Sun-shattering sword. 36 rainbow-colored sword lights instantly destroyed the giant sword and the hundreds of dazzling sword lights. Bang! 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 Muffled explosions could be heard as fragments of divine light rained down from the sky. Liang Jianqing and Yi Liangen were both hit by a few swords. Blood spurted out from their bodies as they screamed and flew backward for dozens of miles. Ji Tianxing used only one move to heavily injure Liang Jianqing and Yi Liangen. Such divine might caused the 40-plus high divine lords to be even more terrified and fearful. But the crowd had already followed Liang Jianqing and Yi Liangen, roaring as they launched an attack. He couldn't give up halfway, right? Everyone had no choice but to grit their teeth and unleash all their divine abilities to besiege him. Swish! Swish! Everyone was using all kinds of divine abilities and consummate skills. Dazzling divine light shot out and covered the sky. The saber light and sword shadows that filled the sky were like a torrential flood, pouring down on Ji Tianxing and drowning his figure. At this moment, the 15,000 giant swords floating in the night sky emitted a dazzling light and stabbed down at the crowd. Swish! 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 Violent sword intent enveloped the 40-plus high divine lords. Bam! 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 Boom! Boom! There was an earth-shattering explosion as the divine abilities and consummate skills that everyone had used were shattered by the sword light. Immediately after, the dense rain of sword light blasted into the crowd, drowning the figures of many high divine lords. The high divine lords who had been charging forward bravely without regard for their own safety were instantly scattered by the rain of sword light and fled pathetically. However, fleeing and dodging were useless. The area within 100 miles was completely filled with sword light. There was nowhere to run. Blood mist burst out from the crowd, and shrill screams could be heard. One after another, high divine lords had their limbs and divine bodies severed by the sword light before exploding into clouds of bloody mist. Even the godheads that were fleeing in panic could not escape the fate of being killed by the sword light. They were all shattered into pieces. The number of high divine lords was rapidly dwindling. Lian Liang Jianqing, and Yi Liangen were also severely injured and were powerless to reverse the situation. Not far away, the 300-plus elites watched with trepidation. Their souls almost left their bodies and they were in extreme despair. Many people lost their will to fight as their willpower collapsed. They could no longer fight as they fled in all directions in a frenzy, letting out indistinct and horrified roars. Soon, misfortune befell them. More than 2,000 giant swords flew over, forming a dozen sword blade storms that swept through the crowd. Anyone who was swept up by the storm, regardless of whether they were 9th-level celestial gods or low-level divine lords, was smashed into pieces and their godheads shattered. In less than 100 breaths, the 300-plus elites were all killed by the sword light. Not a single one was left. And at this moment, more than half of the 40-plus high divine lords were killed by the 10,000 swords. Only a dozen or so high divine lords were left and they were still resisting, struggling to hold on. These dozen or so people were the strongest and most powerful among the many experts. They included Lian Liang Jianqing, Yi Liangen, the Four Directions divine generals, and the 3 elders Poshing. However, the 13 high divine lords were all covered in blood. Their hair was disheveled and they were severely injured. They looked very wretched. The high divine lords with the worst injuries had their arms or legs cut off. One of them was almost cut in half at the waist. At this point, the battle was about to end. No matter how the 13 high divine lords erupted or what trump cards they used, they could not change the outcome of their deaths. And Ji Tianxing was still completely unharmed. The heaven-destroying sword formation was still intact, operating firmly and powerfully. 7 stars sword. While a high divine lord was blocking the sword rain, Ji Tianxing appeared behind him and stabbed repeatedly with his sword. With a muffled explosion, the high divine lord did not even have the chance to scream before his divine body was destroyed. Pieces of flesh and blood splattered everywhere. The others were so angry that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They all charged at Ji Tianxing and attacked with all their might. Ji Tianxing's figure flashed and he teleported behind a high divine lord and stabbed rapidly with his sword. Bam! The burial of heaven sword instantly stabbed into the high divine lord's back. A dazzling divine light burst out and blasted him into smithereens. A godhead flew out from the bloody mist and instinctively fled into the distance. Ji Tianxing swung his sword again and chopped the godhead into pieces. Just like that, one high divine lord after another was killed by Ji Tianxing. When a few high divine lords died one after another and the 3 elders Poshing were also killed, only the 4 directions divine general, Liang Zhenqing, Yi Liangen, and Lian were left. The crowd finally could not hold on any longer. Lian and Liang Zhenqing looked at each other and used all their strength to self-destruct. Chapter 3169. The Lian and Liang Zhenqing had been forced into a corner and could only self-detonate. Other than that, they could not think of any other way to hurt Ji Tianxing. The 2 of them lit up with dazzling divine light as their divine bodies shook violently, emitting a dangerous aura that could destroy heaven and earth. Yi Liangen and the 4 directions divine generals were shocked to see this, and their expressions became extremely complicated. They instinctively wanted to retreat and persuade the Lian and Liang Zhenqing. However, they were well aware of the situation. Self-detonation would kill them, but not self-detonation would still kill them. Since they were going to die either way, they might as well self-detonate. They might even be able to hurt Ji Tianxing and destroy this damned sword formation. Thus, the 4 directions divine generals and Yi Liangen also made up their minds and self-detonated at the same time. When they ignited their godheads, blood flames soared from their bodies, and their bodies shook violently, emitting an incomparably violent aura. Everyone was in great pain, and they were filled with anger and hatred. They glared at Ji Tianxing and let out angry roars. "Bastard! You forced us to do this. Brat, let's welcome death together. Even if we die, we'll drag you down with us. Let's go to hell together, ha ha ha." It looked like the 7 high-level divine lords were about to self-detonate. When that happened, the entire heaven-vanquishing sword formation would be destroyed, and everything within 100,000 miles would be razed to the ground. At this critical juncture, Ji Tianxing made a choice that left everyone dumbfounded. He unleashed his strongest power and used the heaven-capturing dragon claw to grab the Lian. Swoosh! The golden dragon claw instantly grabbed the swollen Lian and pulled him in front of Ji Tianxing. What was even more incredible was that Ji Tianxing's unparalleled divine power actually sealed the Lian. He forcibly suppressed the Lian self-detonation. Then, he used his divine consciousness to control the heaven-vanquishing sword formation and deactivated it. Shua! With a flash of light, the 25,000 sword lights of the heaven-destroying sword formation, which had covered 1,000 miles, disappeared without a trace. That was not all. Ji Tianxing swung the sword of burial of heaven and used an ultimate technique. Rising Dragon Slash. He brazenly swung his sword and slashed out a golden dragon shadow between him, the 4 directions godly generals, Liang Zhenqing, and Yi Liangen. The 100-mile-long sword light that looked like a golden dragon tore through the night sky and split the area into 2. A huge spatial crack appeared between the 2. The 2 of them were clearly 200 miles apart, but they were in different spaces. Liang Zhenqing, Yi Liangen, and the 4 directions divine generals were all dumbfounded. They simply couldn't believe that Ji Tianxing was actually able to slash through the night sky and create a huge spatial rift. It can even cut through space. Just how powerful is he? Only a godly king expert can cut through the void. Looks like we were right. He is really a godly king expert. No wonder. We didn't lose for nothing. The 6 Sir Gods exclaimed and exclaimed. They had mixed feelings. However, they didn't have time to think. In the next moment, they suddenly exploded, turning into 6 balls of dazzling light that were like the scorching sun, blooming with the most dazzling colors in the night sky. That was the most dazzling moment in their lives. It was also the last moment. Boom. Boom boom boom. 6 consecutive earth-shattering explosions were heard. It was like a super loud sound that reverberated in the sky. Boundless divine flames and light spread out in all directions, engulfing everything in its path. The ground within a 100-mile-long crater was blasted into the ground and dust was stirred up. However, the shockwave that was aimed at Ji Tianxing was blocked by the spatial crack after it spread for 100 miles. The destructive shockwave rushed out of the spatial crack and into the vast void. Of course, the spatial crack was only 100 miles wide. It was like a 100-mile-long chasm. Even more 5-colored shockwaves swept across from other places, illuminating the night sky as bright as day. A 100-mile-long crater was blasted into the ground. Ji Tianxing stood next to the spatial crack. The area within a 100-mile-long radius around him was calm and very safe. The Lian Er's self-detonation was suppressed. His godhead was heavily damaged, and more than half of his body was burned. He was on the verge of death. However, he was still conscious. He witnessed this scene with his own eyes and was extremely shocked. It was so shocking that he almost lost his ability to think. His mind was blank. There was only one word left. It's over. The 13,000-strong army was completely annihilated. He was the only survivor, but he had fallen into Ji Tianxing's hands. His life was no longer in his own hands. He wasn't worried about his own safety. After all, he would die in the end. What he was more worried about was that the self-detonation of so many Sir Gods would destroy everything within a 100-mile-long radius. And Raging Flame Royal City was 150,000 miles to the south. If the shockwave swept through Raging Flame Royal City, the consequences would be unimaginable. The destructive shockwaves spread until they were 100,000 miles away before their power gradually weakened. When they were 150,000 miles away, the 5-colored shockwaves gradually dissipated. From the explosion point to the north, there were mountains and valleys for hundreds of thousands of miles. Now, they had all been razed to the ground and turned into ruins. And to the south, there were flat grasslands all the way to the outside of Raging Flame Royal City. There was no doubt that the hundreds of thousands of miles of plains had also been flattened, and the earth had been shaved off nearly 100,000 feet. The destructive shockwaves spread all the way to the outside of Raging Flame Royal City and gradually dissipated when they were about to reach the city walls. The Great City Protection Array in the north of Raging Flame Royal City was affected by the shockwaves and automatically activated. In the brightly lit Royal City, countless people saw the divine light that covered the sky and the earth, the power that could destroy the world. Countless people were frightened. They screamed and shouted in horror, and some even prepared to run away. For a moment, the originally quiet Raging Flame Royal City became lively. Countless people walked out of their homes and onto the streets, looking up at the night sky in the north and discussing spiritedly. The ordinary people didn't know what was going on. That boundless divine light didn't seem to be the result of a great battle between experts. After all, no one could release such a terrifying divine light. Therefore, many people guessed that it was some kind of anomaly or some kind of omen. And in the royal palace of Raging Flame Royal City, when the king of Raging Flame heard the news, his face darkened on the spot, and his eyes flashed with deep hatred and disappointment. He was well aware that it wasn't some kind of anomaly, but the self-destruction of a divine lord. Moreover, the self-destruction of a divine lord couldn't have such great power. It must have been caused by the self-destruction of many divine lords at the same time. The answer was obvious. He had already guessed that Yi Liang'an, the Four Directions divine generals, and the experts of the royal palace wouldn't be able to come back. Moreover, The shockwaves of the self-destruction had spread for hundreds of thousands of miles, and the 13,000 troops would definitely have died. However, after the grief and anger, there was only one question left in his mind. The power of the self-destruction was so terrifying. That bastard Tianxing should be dead, right? If they died together, the sacrifice of the 13,000 troops would be worth it. Chapter 3170. Outside the palace. Inside the resplendent palace. This time, Prince Lian wasn't in the secret chamber. He was standing on the roof of the palace, silently gazing at the northern night sky. The cold wind whistled, blowing his long hair and gold-threaded black robe back and forth. Two attendants dressed in black stood quietly behind him. Even though the overwhelming divine power shockwave had dissipated a long time ago, Prince Lian still stood on the roof of the palace. But Prince Lian stood motionless on the roof and continued to stare at the northern night sky without saying a word. King City was bustling with noise and excitement. Everywhere was brightly lit, and people were moving about. Prince Lian wasn't affected at all. He muttered to himself, Lian Liang Jianqing, and the 13,000 people have completed their mission. The battle is over. I, still lost. Prince Lian's voice was low, cold, and solemn, with a hint of exhaustion and self-mockery. But he was strangely calm. He didn't get angry or curse. Perhaps he had already predicted the outcome of tonight's battle. Or maybe he had been defeated by Ji Tianxing for so long that he was numb to it. The two attendants behind him hurriedly comforted Prince Lian. Don't worry, Your Highness. The destructive shockwave must have been caused by the self-destruction of many divine lords. Although second brother and sect leader Liang have sacrificed themselves, their sacrifice was worth it. But their sacrifice was worth it. That D*MN beast Tianxing must have been killed by the explosion. Your Highness, I've already sent a spy to Celestial Dragon Mountain to investigate. Please wait for a moment. We'll have the results and news soon. The status and position of these two attendants were both lower than Lian. But they were also Prince Lian's confidants. His personal guards were named Lian San and Lian Sai respectively. Prince Lian shook his head and said calmly, no need to wait. I've already guessed the result. If Lian and Liang Jianqing could really kill Tianxing, why would they self-destruct? Besides, I know Tianxing's strength and prowess better than anyone else. Even if he withstood the shockwave of the explosion, he would at most be slightly injured. He definitely won't die. Lian San and Lian Sai looked at each other, both showing worry and anxiety. But when they saw Prince Lian so pessimistic and depressed, they didn't know how to console him. At this time, Grand Prince Lian looked up at the night sky again and said in a sorrowful tone, the 9 great sects are gone, and the elites of the He Tian sect branch are all dead. Even the imperial army under Chang Yi's command suffered heavy casualties, their strength greatly reduced. This king spent 20 years to develop this situation and secretly control this divine kingdom, but now, there is nothing left. Tianxing, he really is this king's old enemy. Grand Prince Lian closed his eyes and heaved a long sigh. His tone was filled with hatred and unwillingness. Both Lian San and Lian Sai could see that Prince Lian was extremely sad and indignant, but he had no choice but to suppress his emotions and try his best to remain calm. If he kept it bottled up in his heart and couldn't find an outlet, it would be easy for problems to arise. Thus, the two of them hurriedly advised, Your Highness, the night wind is cold here. You should return to the hall to wait and rest. Your Highness, we've only suffered a temporary setback. When you recover, that brat will definitely be executed. As they spoke, the two of them supported Prince Lian on his left and right and were about to return to the hall to rest. However, Prince Lian shook them off and sneered with anger, this king's injuries have mostly recovered. Do I still need you to support me? Am I that weak? The two of them hurriedly bowed and apologized. Prince Lian didn't pursue the matter and said expressionlessly, no need to rest. Go pack up and gather all the attendants. We should leave. Now. Leave this palace? Lian Sai was startled, his face full of surprise. Lian San thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. The defensive power of this palace is much weaker than before. It's weakened by several times. Now that all the forces under your Highness's command have been destroyed, we have no one to use. Only within the palace, there are still a large number of experts protecting it. Only then will your Highness be safe. Lian Sai finally understood and hurriedly agreed, that's right. Then I'll go gather the attendants now. Seeing that the two of them had misunderstood, Prince Lian frowned and said in a deep voice, you too idiot. When did I say we're going to the palace? With the few men under Chang'e, if Tianqing really wants to kill his way into the capital, can they stop him? I'm asking you to gather the attendants and pack up. We're leaving the capital. In his anger, Prince Lian spoke more bluntly. The meaning of these words was that they were going to pack up and run away. Lian San and Lian Sai were surprised and puzzled. They muttered in their hearts, it can't be like this, right? Is it really that serious? After hesitating for a moment, Lian San asked tentatively, Your Highness, where should we go after we leave the raging flame capital? Don't tell me you're going back to the capital. Prince Lian turned to glare at him and scolded, why would I go back to the capital? To let those bastards see me as a joke? I'm going to the heavenly sect. My injuries haven't healed, so I need to recuperate in seclusion. The heavenly sect he was talking about was the headquarters of the Great Yang Empire. As for injuries haven't healed and need to recuperate, it was an excuse. His injuries were clearly 80% healed. Lian San and Lian Sai completely understood Prince Lian's meaning. They did not say anything else and hurriedly carried out the order. Prince Lian was still standing on the roof, looking coldly at the night sky in the north. He stood there for a long time before he turned and left. The Sky Dragon Mountain from before had long ceased to exist. The area within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles had long been turned into deep pits and ruins. After the shock wave of the self-detonation ended, Ji Tianqing was unscathed. Lian Er's self-detonation had been suppressed. His divine body and godhead were sealed, and he could not move like a stone statue. Ji Tianqing carried him in his hand and patrolled the battlefield, plundering a small amount of spoils. Most of the spoils were destroyed by the shock wave of the self-detonation. In the end, only about 30 spatial rings, more than 10 pieces of high-grade monarch equipment, and dozens of godhead fragments were left. These items were scattered near the spatial rift and had not been affected by the explosion. What a pity. The spatial rings and equipment of more than 13,000 people must be worth hundreds of millions. Ji Tianqing furrowed his brows and sighed inwardly. Fortunately, the spatial rings, divine weapons, and godhead fragments he had obtained were all from the high-grade divine lords. Although there were not many of them, they were still valuable. After putting away the spoils, he carried Lian and flew into the night sky. Soon, he disappeared into the horizon. He did not continue south, nor did he directly attack Monarch City. This was because he had kept Lian alive for the time being. There was still a big use for him. 4 hours later, Ji Tianqing flew 200,000 miles away and hid in a remote mountain range. He began to interrogate Lian Lian was Prince Lian's absolute confidant and knew a lot of information and secrets. Ji Tianqing wanted to learn more about Prince Lian through this person. Chapter 3171. The Lian was very loyal to Prince Lian, and he was unyielding. No matter how Ji Tianqing interrogated him, he kept his mouth shut and didn't reveal a single word. When Ji Tianqing saw this, he wasted no more time and killed the Lian Then, he took out the Lian godhead and circulated his energy to refine it, stripping the memories from his soul. This method was simple and crude, but it had its drawbacks as well. Directly refining the memories from the godhead was often incomplete. There would be many omissions. Moreover, the Lian was already heavily injured. He had even ignited his godhead and self-detonated. Although his self-detonation had been suppressed by Ji Tianqing, his godhead was still damaged. Not only was his primal qi greatly damaged, but his strength had also plummeted. Even his memories were incomplete and damaged. Even if Ji Tianqing refined his godhead, he didn't know how much of his soul memories he could obtain. Under such circumstances, whether he could obtain key secrets and information would depend on his luck. A black pagoda hovered in a cave in the belly of a mountain. Ji Tianxing entered the divine pagoda and circulated his energy to refine the godhead in the distorted spacetime. Only 2 hours had passed in the outside world, but he had spent 4 days in the distorted spacetime. These 4 days were enough for him to refine the Lianer's godhead and strip the memories from his soul. Ji Tianxing was pleasantly surprised by the results. At the same time, he felt slightly depressed and regretful. This was because Ji Tianxing had obtained many of Prince Lian's secrets from the Lianer's memories. This included Prince Lian's background, experience, inner thoughts and goals, as well as what he had done over the years. He was very clear about it all. Ji Tianxing even knew the thoughts of the Great Yang Emperor and the Great Yang Prince, as well as many secrets of the Great Yang Empire. What interested him the most was that there was a very important thing in Lianer's memory. 9 years ago, a faction in the Great Yang Empire discovered a mystic realm within the empire's borders. Those experts accidentally entered the secret realm and discovered a divine palace. It seemed to be the cave dwelling of a god-king expert. The experts were so excited that they rushed into the cavern with hearts full of excitement. They had thought that it would be a great opportunity. They would be able to obtain a king-grade divine artifact and the inheritance of a god-king. But they did not expect that what awaited them was danger and death. They had triggered a king-grade divine formation outside the cave, and 3 of them had been killed on the spot. Only 2 of them survived, and they fled the secret realm in a panic. After the news spread, many top forces swarmed over, trying all kinds of ways to break the cave mansion's formation. However, any random king-grade divine formation around the cavern would take those forces a few months, or even a year or 2, to break through. The matter became more and more intense, and gradually, more top forces found out about it. Even the royal family of the Great Yang Empire knew about this. Hence, the Great Yang Emperor sent many experts and the Imperial Guard to occupy the mystic realm. Great Yang's emperor's intention was clear. He wanted to monopolize the mystic realm. This incurred the displeasure of many factions. Dozens of top forces joined forces to resist the Great Yang imperial family. In the face of king-grade divine artifacts, techniques, secret techniques, and inheritances, all the participants were envious. They swore to reap the benefits. To maintain the stability of the empire, the Great Yang Emperor had no choice but to compromise. In the end, the 50 factions came to a consensus and formed an alliance to keep this a secret. They would explore the mystic realm together. As for how to split the loot after the cave abode was opened, the various factions had different opinions. Fortunately, there were too many divine formations in the cave abode. They could not break through them in a short time. Hence, the 50 factions patiently explored and broke through the divine formations bit by bit. Now that 9 years had passed, they had made great progress in their exploration of the God King's cave abode. At the very least, they had figured out one thing. It was indeed a God King's cave abode. It was called the Green Jade Divine Palace. It should be the Green Jade Divine King's residence. At the mention of the Green Jade Divine King, the story from 10,000 years ago had to be brought up. 10,000 years ago, the Green Jade Divine King walked out of the Great Yang Empire and rose to prominence. His name was known throughout the northern region. First published on the Chinese website. Although the Green Jade Divine King had vanished thousands of years ago, his whereabouts were unknown. However, there was evidence that the Green Jade Divine King had lived in the Great Yang Empire for at least 3,000 years. One could imagine that the Green Jade Divine King had lived in the cave abode for 3,000 years. Who knew how many divine items, treasures, and cultivation insights he had left behind? If any divine lord could obtain the Green Jade Divine King's inheritance, cultivation insights, and divine artifacts, it would be a great opportunity. Not only would they have a chance to become a legendary god king, but their combat strength would also increase exponentially. In any case, after confirming the owner of the cave abode, the 50 factions became even more frenzied. The Heavenly Unity sect behind Prince Lian was, naturally, one of the 50 factions. They wanted a share of the loot in the future. Prince Lian had been active in the Fiery Flame and Blood Flame divine nations. However, his heart was always on the Green Jade Divine Palace. Once the Green Jade Divine Palace opened and the 50 factions wanted to enter, he would put everything aside and rush to the Green Jade Divine Palace. After all, it was his greatest opportunity and hope to become a God King. If he could obtain the Green Jade Divine King's inheritance, cultivation insights, divine artifacts, and divine abilities, he would have a chance to become a God King. Once he became a peerless God King, he would be able to seek revenge on the great Yang Emperor for killing his mother and seize the throne. Then, he would deal with Ji Tianxing, and he would be able to easily kill him and take revenge. After learning this secret, Ji Tianxing was in a good mood. He smiled playfully. You want to enter a God King's palace and obtain his inheritance and king-grade divine artifact. Prince Lian, oh Prince Lian, I'm afraid you won't have a chance in this lifetime. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself. Suddenly, he muttered the Green Jade Divine King's name and frowned in confusion. Green Jade Divine King? Where have I heard this name before? Ji Tianxing thought about it seriously for a long time, and finally had an impression of it. I remember now. In my past life, I came to the boundless heaven continent to look for Crimson Sun Divine Gold to improve the quality of the Burial of Heaven sword. I met this person in the Raging Flame Sea area and even fought with him because of a misunderstanding. This person was also a God King who cultivated the Sword Dao and created 2 Sword Dao divine abilities. But he was completely defeated by me in one move. Ji Tianxing's memories immediately became clear. He remembered that when he met the Green Jade Divine King back then, he had exchanged 3 moves with him. Each time, the Green Jade Divine King's sword move was easily broken by him. At that time, the Green Jade Divine King was at the 3rd firmament realm and was traveling the boundless heaven continent, pursuing higher divine Dao realms and sword Dao profundities. Meanwhile, he had just broken through to the God King realm not long ago and was still at the 1st firmament Divine King realm. But he defeated the Green Jade Divine King very easily. It was precisely because of this that the Green Jade Divine King was very shocked and also felt reverence and admiration for him. Not only did the 2 of them not become enemies, the Green Jade Divine King even apologized to him and sincerely asked for guidance on Sword Dao profundities. At that time, Kenshin saw the Green Jade Divine King's sincere attitude and casually gave him a few pointers. In the end, the words woke him up. The Green Jade Divine King came to a realization and bowed and thanked him excitedly. Chapter 3172. Kenshin and God King Azure Jade's interactions were limited to this. After the misunderstanding was resolved, Kenshin enlightened God King Azure Jade, making God King Azure Jade shed tears of gratitude. Kenshin back then had a slightly cold and aloof personality. He did not exchange pleasantries with God King Azure Jade and left straight away. God King Azure Jade also maintained his poise and did not chase after. He stood where he was and bowed, sending Kenshin off respectfully. This was just a trivial matter to Kenshin. It had happened countless times in his life and would not take it to heart at all. But to God King Azure Jade, it should be a major event worth remembering. After all, he had received Kenshin's enlightenment and had an epiphany on the spot. His Sword Dao cultivation and strength realm would definitely increase. After the reminiscing ended, Ji Tianxing sighed with a complicated expression. Sigh, in a blink of an eye, more than 1,000 years have passed. I've already reincarnated as a person and changed my appearance. An ordinary God King that I once met by chance is now going to cross paths again. Fate is really strange. Without a doubt, when he learned of the Azure Jade Palace's existence, he decided to head there. To the present him, a God King expert's cave abode was also extremely attractive. He was not interested in God King Azure Jade's cultivation experience and insights, nor did he want to learn. At most, it was just for reference. After all, God King Azure Jade's talent, perception, and strength were all inferior to his former self. What truly interested him was the divine pills, divine artifacts, treasures, and materials that might exist in the Azure Jade Palace. The pills, divine artifacts, and materials collected by a God King expert would definitely be king-grade. And what Ji Tianxing lacked the most now was king-grade divine items. If he could obtain some God King level refining materials, then he would be able to start upgrading the Sword of Burial of Heaven very soon. Once the Sword of Burial of Heaven recovered to God King level, its power would be even more terrifying. Furthermore, the Azure Jade Palace was protected by layers of divine arrays, all king-grade divine arrays. The Great Yang Empire's 50 top factions explored and studied for 9 years but could not see the palace's entrance. But Ji Tianxing did not have such concerns. With his array Dao strength, vision, and experience, cracking it was absolutely easy. However, now was not the time to go to the Green Jade Palace. Moreover, he did not know the exact location of the secret realm. The most important thing right now was to take care of Prince Lian. Ji Tianxing did not waste any time. He immediately ended his cultivation and left the distorted space-time. He returned to the cave, put away the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda, and flew toward the south. Along the way, he flew over towering mountains and steep ridges. Not far away, he saw endless ruins and deep pits. It was caused by the self-detonation of several high-level divine lords. Even now, dust was still flying everywhere, and smoke and dust filled the air. Ji Tianxing probed with his divine sense and saw a large number of armored and black-clothed experts searching around the ruins. He didn't even need to think to know that those people must be Prince Lian and the King of Raging Flame's men. His decisive battle with an army of 13,000 had caused such a huge commotion that the entire Raging Flame royal city was alarmed. It would be strange if the King of Raging Flame and Prince Lian did not send someone to check on the situation. Ji Tianxing increased his speed. Like a stream of light cutting through the night sky, he headed straight for the Raging Flame royal city. While hurrying, he was still thinking in his heart, I hope Prince Lian still has some hope in his heart and did not leave the royal city. As long as he is still in the royal city, tonight will be the day of his death. It was already early in the morning, and there were still 4 hours before daybreak. To Ji Tianxing, time was enough. As long as Prince Lian was still in the royal city, he would definitely die before daybreak. Unknowingly, 2 hours passed. Ji Tianxing flew for 180,000 miles and arrived outside the Raging Flame royal city. Under the pitch-black curtain of night, the Raging Flame royal city sat quietly on the grassland. This majestic city that had existed for 10,000 years was neatly built. It occupied an area of 500 miles and could accommodate millions of people. The main city walls around the city were made of black stone that was hundreds of meters tall. While it was solemn and dignified, its defensive power was also very strong. Although the city walls had been repaired several times in the past 10,000 years. However, the most recent renovation was 1,000 years ago. The strip-shaped boulders that built the city walls were covered with moss, as well as cracks and marks etched by wind and frost. In each of the 4 directions of the royal city, there was a huge city gate that was 800 meters tall. It could allow 12 carriages to enter and exit at the same time. It was incomparably spacious. It was late at night, and the north gate was tightly shut. There were hundreds of city guards stationed under the gate, all of them armed with swords and sabers, waiting in formation. If it was in the past, the royal city would have been quiet and peaceful by now, and the lights would have been much sparser. But tonight, the entire royal city was brightly lit, and hundreds of thousands of people were still moving around outside. Countless God race members gathered together in the streets and alleys, whispering to each other. Even the number of city guards patrolling had increased several times. There were also many mysterious black-clothed people coming and going in and out of the royal city, seeming to be in a hurry. An iron-blooded and solemn atmosphere shrouded the entire royal city, and it also made the people somewhat worried. Many people were guessing whether a great enemy had come to invade. Was the royal city about to be attacked? Ji Tianxing stood outside the north gate, hiding in the clouds, looking down at the royal city of Raging Flame, quietly observing. The 4 great city defense arrays protecting the royal city had been activated, covering the north, south, east, and west respectively. No matter where Ji Tianxing sneaked into the royal city, he had to break one of the great city defense arrays. Otherwise, he could only go through the 4 city gates and be interrogated by the city guards. Or he could directly force his way through the city gates and kill everyone in his way. In that case, he would alert the King of Raging Flame and Prince Lian before he could get close to the palace. After thinking about it, Ji Tianxing still decided to quietly break the great city defense arrays. The north gate was heavily guarded. Not only were there many city guards patrolling, but there was also a large number of imperial guards lying in ambush. Furthermore, there were more than a dozen divine lords hiding in many houses and buildings not far from the city gate. This was obviously to prevent Ji Tianxing from coming from the north and forcing his way through the north gate. In order not to alert the enemy, Ji Tianxing quietly went to the south gate. He had already used the divine eye secret technique to observe and could clearly see the defensive power of the 4 city gates. In comparison, the south gate seemed to be heavily guarded on the surface, with a large number of city guards and imperial guards. But in reality, the south gate's defensive power was the weakest. Choosing to sneak into the royal city from there was, of course, the safest choice. Ji Tianxing flew to the south side of the city wall and quietly burrowed into the ground. After moving 100 feet underground, he was blocked by the 5-colored light shield. So, he used the divine eye secret technique to carefully observe the great city defense array. This array had a radius of 100 miles, and it was a supreme monarch-level divine array. Its structure was quite complicated, and its defensive power was also very strong. Ji Tianxing could guess that it was most likely set up by many high-level divine lords. Also, it had to be strengthened and reinforced for many years to have such power. However, to Ji Tianxing, this was not a difficult task. Chapter 3173. After a mere 15 minutes, Ji Tianxing saw through the structure of the city protecting Grand Array. He accurately found the weak point of the Grand Array and started casting his art to crack this flaw. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. He kneaded divine seals with both hands, releasing hundreds, thousands of divine powers, firing into a certain node of the 5-colored light barrier. Time passed quietly. Half an hour passed very quickly. When Ji Tianxing struck out more than 18,000th strand of divine power, the node collapsed. A fist-sized hole appeared on the resplendent 5-colored light barrier, and it rapidly expanded and enlarged. In a short 2 breaths, that hole became the size of a water vat, enough for Ji Tianxing to pass through. Swoosh! He passed through the hole without hesitation, crossing over the city protecting Grand Array, and entered the capital. And at this time, something that he did not expect happened. Below the South City Gate, among the 300-plus city guards, someone suddenly let out a cry of surprise. Damn it! Someone is cracking the Grand Array underground, attempting to sneak into the capital. Hurry! Everyone, follow this lord. The person who let out the cry of surprise was a middle-aged man wearing standard armor, his looks unassuming. This person's attire was the same as ordinary city guards, inconspicuous in the crowd. Furthermore, he even wore a mysterious circular jade pendant, suppressing his aura fully, stabilizing around 7th-level celestial deity realm. But in reality, his true strength reached 7th-level celestial deity realm, high-rank divine lord. Swoosh! At the same time that this middle-aged man cried out in surprise, he tunneled underground without hesitation, pouncing toward Ji Tianxing. The 300-plus city guards were stunned for a moment, then they also dived underground under the lead of several captains. Previously, Ji Tianxing used divine sense to sweep across the city guards below the South City Gate. It was just a rough observation and he did not take it to heart. Because he knew that the city guards below the gate were all decorations. The ones with real combat strength were the Imperial Guards lying in ambush inside the city gate. But he never would have thought that there was actually a high-rank divine lord disguised as an ordinary city guard, and even relied on a divine artifact to suppress his aura, hiding in the crowd. A tiny mistake caused his whereabouts to be exposed, alarming the city guards. Under the lead of the middle-aged Sir God, the 300 city guards quickly arrived near Ji Tianxing. Without saying a word, everyone pulled out their swords and sabers and launched a siege with no regard for their own safety. On the other side, the 500 Imperial Army soldiers lying in ambush at the southern city gate also received the news and signal. Knowing that there were intruders, they all pulled out their swords and sabers and were on high alert. Soon, a great battle broke out underground. More than 300 city guards unleashed all kinds of divine powers and ultimate skills, unleashing a torrent of divine light that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, blasting toward Ji Tianxing. The soil and rocks below the ground had been blown to smithereens by the divine light and shadow, revealing enormous faults and loopholes. In the face of this sudden situation, Ji Tianxing was not worried. He was just a little surprised. There's actually a high divine lord disguised as an ordinary city guard and waited for me at the southern city gate. He didn't know if it was Prince Lian's arrangement or the King of Raging Flames' decree. If this was arranged by the ruler of the Kingdom of Raging Flames, then he was a schemer who could not be underestimated. After all, this person had already guessed this lord's thoughts and actually knew how to do the opposite. With this thought in mind, Ji Tianxing waved his hands and decisively unleashed a sky full of sword glows to resist the siege of the city guards. Bam! 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 Boom! 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 With a deafening explosion, the sky full of sword glows clashed with the divine light and shadow, creating a terrifying shockwave. More than 100 city guards were killed on the spot by the shockwave, turning into a bloody mist and dregs. There were still more than 200 sword glows that had not shattered. They were still as sharp as ever as they charged toward the 100 or so survivors. The shockwave spread out and caused the ground to collapse for dozens of miles. The entire royal city shook violently as if a great earthquake had occurred. Even the city walls near the southern city gate had caved in a little. As a result, more than half of the royal city was alarmed. Those commoners who were still on the streets discussing the shockwave of the self-detonation instantly paled and let out worried cries. Heavens, we were right. There is indeed a strong enemy invading the royal city and they are already fighting. I felt it just now. The shockwave came from underground. The strong enemy had sneaked into the royal city from underground. If the strong enemy had sneaked into the royal city silently, that would be the most dangerous. Luckily, the city guards and the imperial guards were more responsible and managed to find the enemy. The shockwave came from near the southern city gate. Everyone, stay as far away as possible to avoid being implicated. All kinds of exclamations and discussions exploded in the royal city and gathered into a torrent of sound waves. But very quickly, the dull sound waves were drowned out by the loud explosion coming from underground. It turned out that it was the 7th-degree realm Sir God who had launched an all-out attack on Ji Tianxing. The two of them exchanged a blow, but Ji Tianxing was not injured at all and did not yield an inch. As for the middle-aged man, he was sent flying backward while vomiting blood. Both of his legs had been minced by the sword glows. Suffering such a heavy injury, the middle-aged man fell into the ruins and gave out a heart-wrenching scream. The 100 over city guards who were lucky enough to survive instantly revealed a horrified expression when they saw their second commander was not able to take one blow from the other party and was seriously injured. But it was too late for them to escape. Hundreds of dazzling golden sword glows, carrying a shapeless sword intent which could kill everything, enveloped everyone. Following the explosion of Bam Bam Bam, those 100 over city guards were turned into dregs by the sword glows. Only that middle-aged man was left alive as he struggled to climb out of the ruins. He wanted to continue fighting, but he happened to see Ji Tianxing killing 100 over city guards in seconds. Seeing this scene, the middle-aged man was horrified. He knew that he wasn't Ji Tianxing's match, so he tried his best to escape. As he escaped into the royal city, he didn't forget to send out a signal for help and a warning. Ji Tianxing's plan had been spoiled and he hated that middle-aged man very much. His face was gloomy as he chased after him with murderous eyes. In just 2 short breaths, he caught up with the middle-aged man and released 3 extremely violent sword glows, turning him into dregs. Even the middle-aged man's godhead was blasted into pieces. The power of the 3 dazzling golden swords did not diminish. They traversed dozens of miles and gradually dissipated into the depths of the ground. Ji Tianxing put away the godhead fragments, entered stealth mode, and left the underground. Swoosh! With a flash of light, he avoided the city guards near the city gate and appeared in a house in the South City district. At the same time, his divine sense enveloped the entire royal city and saw everything in the royal city clearly. All the people in the city ran in panic and hid in their own residences. And within the royal palace, a large number of city guards and palace experts rushed out and rushed over at an extremely fast speed. Even the Sir God experts guarding the other 3 city gates quickly rushed over to provide support. Ji Tianxing was quite surprised by the speed of the other party's reaction. However, he maintained stealth mode and concealed his aura, successfully hiding from everyone's detection. He swaggered out of the house and flew across the night sky at a moderate speed towards the brightly lit royal palace. Chapter 3174. As Ji Tianqing flew toward the palace, many imperial guards and experts rushed toward him from all directions. There were at least 30 groups and more than 1,000 people. They all looked hurried and murderous. However, these people brushed past Ji Tianqing and did not notice him. When they arrived near the south gate, they naturally did not find him. They hurriedly searched around. At this time, Ji Tianqing had arrived at the side of the palace. The palace was located in the middle of the city. It covered an area of 50 square miles and was like a small city. The palace walls, which were hundreds of feet high, were lined with imperial guards in armor and holding swords. They were ready for battle. Within the palace walls, there were hundreds of splendid palaces and buildings, all of which were lit up with dazzling lights. Shadows of people could be seen everywhere. Tonight, the palace were destined to be chaotic. Not only were the imperial guards on high alert, but even the attendants and servants in the palace were also in a defensive posture. Obviously, the King of Raging Flame had already given the order and reminded the people in the palace. He had already guessed that Ji Tianqing would sneak into the palace to take revenge. Therefore, the entire palace was in a state of nervousness. What gave Ji Tianqing a headache was that the palace also had 2 layers of defensive divine arrays, and they were fully activated. The 2 defensive divine arrays were not big. They only covered an area of 50 square miles, which was just enough to cover the entire palace. The defensive divine array of the palace was also of supreme monarch level. However, compared to the 4 defensive divine arrays, it was more sophisticated and complex. Its defensive power was also more powerful. Ji Tianqing hid in the dark and used the secret technique of God's Eye to observe for half an hour before he found a flaw. It took him another hour to break through the 2 defensive divine formations one after the other. He passed through the hole in the colorful light shield and successfully sneaked into the palace. However, just as he appeared outside a majestic palace, a bright divine light shone above his head. More than a dozen divine light shadows bombarded him. At the same time, a few deep and majestic roars sounded in the night sky. "The thief is here. Come and surround him. Found him. He's here. Come and help. Quick, surround him. We can't let him escape." Very clearly, when Ji Tianqing was cracking the defensive divine array, he was discovered by a divine lord powerhouse. In the night sky 10,000 feet in front of him, there were 3 high divine lords. They were all imperial consecrators under the monarch's command. Other than the 3 of them, there were more than a dozen consecrators in the palace. Normally, these consecrators lived like princes and cultivated in seclusion, not showing themselves easily. Now that it was a critical moment, all the consecrators had been awakened to protect the safety of the palace. Each of them led a group of elite imperial guards to guard every direction of the palace. Coincidentally, the 3 inner palace consecrators were nearby and discovered Ji Tianqing, who was breaking the divine formation. The 3 of them attacked without any hesitation. At the same time, they called for reinforcements from the inner palace and the imperial army. Soon, dozens of saber lights and sword shadows arrived in front of Ji Tianqing and engulfed his figure. Ji Tianqing wasn't worried at all. He swung the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand, sending out 9 dazzling sword lights. Bang! 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 The sacred giant sword clashed with the saber lights and sword shadows, creating a deafening sound. In a blink, the divine powers of the 3 inner palace consecrators were shattered by the sword lights. Not only that, the 9 giant swords didn't lose their power. They attacked the 3 consecrators separately. The 3 consecrators were shocked. Their expressions changed immediately. They hurriedly performed their ultimate skills to block the attack with all their strength. After another series of muffled sounds, the 3 inner palace consecrators were knocked back and fell into 2 palaces with blood spurting out of their mouths. The defensive divine formations of the 2 palaces were also smashed until divine light flashed chaotically and cracks appeared on them. Ji Tianqing wanted to take advantage of the situation and quickly kill the 3 injured inner palace consecrators. However, another 4 consecrators and more than 1,000 imperial army hurried to the scene. Everyone's gazes and divine senses locked onto Ji Tianxing and attacked him without hesitation. Suddenly, deafening battle cries burst out, and the dazzling light of divine spells lit up, and the area became chaotic. Ji Tianxing was besieged and had to give up on killing the 3 inner palace consecrators. He turned to fend off the 1,000 imperial army. Infinite sky of chaos. In order to save time and divine power, he used his divine powers and his body became transparent. All of a sudden, the overwhelming saber light and sword shadows pierced through his body and scattered on the ground. Most of the divine powers dissipated and their power was absorbed by the world. A small portion of the divine art light shadows blasted into a palace with a radius of 100 feet, instantly turning it into ruins. Ji Tianxing was unharmed and took the opportunity to wave the burial of heaven. Sword light filled the sky. Sword of the breaking sun. God-killing sword. Sword light poured down from the sky and drowned the 4 inner palace consecrators and more than 1,000 imperial army soldiers. Suddenly, blood and flesh splattered under the sword light. Screams rose and fell. The elite imperial army soldiers could not withstand a single blow from the sword light. They were as fragile as paper. After a burst of violent sword light flashed, more than 800 imperial guards were killed and turned into blood mist and dregs. Even the 4 inner palace consecrators were seriously injured by the god-killing sword. Some of them lost limbs and some were even cut in half at the waist. Such a shocking scene caused a few of the inner palace consecrators and the surviving imperial guards to reveal expressions of fear and let out terrified cries. The 3 consecrators who were seriously injured wanted to help. Seeing this scene, the 3 of them stopped their charge and pretended to be physically exhausted as they retreated to the side. They hurriedly circulated their qi to suppress their injuries. Seeing that the surroundings had fallen into silence, the situation was a little awkward. More than 800 imperial army soldiers and 7 inner palace consecrators did not dare to attack. Fortunately, 2 more inner palace consecrators and a commander of the imperial army arrived with more than 1,000 imperial army soldiers. This group of people came aggressively with murderous intent. They roared and charged, releasing divine light that covered the sky and drowning Ji Tianxing. Seeing this, the 800 imperial army soldiers and 7 consecrators were slightly relieved. They quickly surrounded and attacked. Since they had more people, they should have a chance to kill him. Taking a step back, even if they could not kill him, they should be safe. However, they soon realized that they were wrong. They had underestimated Ji Tianxing's terrifying strength. Sword, come. Ji Tianxing saw that more and more people were coming, so he used his ultimate killing move. Since he had already snuck into the palace and exposed himself, he had no qualms about killing. He pointed his right hand at the sky and gathered the power of the stars to form 25,000 divine giant swords. They poured down like a meteor shower. In an instant, the dazzling meteor shower enveloped the entire imperial city. The night sky within a 10,000-mile radius was as bright as day. Countless divine giant swords poured down, focusing on the palace within a 50,000-mile radius. As a result, the divine giant swords in this area were as dense as raindrops. Chapter 3175. Boom, boom, boom. There was a series of loud noises. The entire palace was engulfed by the huge divine swords. It was a colorful scene. More than 1,000 imperial guards, 9 imperial consecrators, and 1 imperial guard commander who had besieged Ji Tianxing were killed on the spot. With Ji Tianxing as the center, the area within a radius of 10,000 feet was a deep pit. All the houses and buildings were reduced to dust, and everyone was blasted into pieces. In just an instant, more than 3,000 people died within the area of 30,000 meters. The other 1,000 people were the royal family members, servants, and guards from the various palaces and residences. Of course, the heaven punishment sword formation covered the entire palace and the number of casualties was much more than that. The 4 city protection arrays and the 2 defense divine arrays of the palace only lasted for about 10 breaths under the attack of the 10,000 swords before they were smashed into pieces. When the defense array collapsed, the entire palace was exposed to the sword formation and was at the mercy of the sword formation. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing deliberately controlled the target of the 10,000 swords. There were 10,000 huge swords around the palace to form a sword net to seal off the area within a radius of 1,000 miles. The other 15,000 giant swords were basically gathered above the palace. Therefore, there were no casualties among the commoners and deities in the palace. On the other hand, the situation in the palace was too horrible to look at. In just 20 breaths, more than 5,000 imperial guards, more than 10,000 royal family members, servants, and guards were killed by the 10,000 swords. Nearly 80% of the palaces and residences were destroyed by the sword radiance. Not even the broken walls were left. Under the attack of the 10,000 swords, not to mention the enlightened masters, even the lower and middle Sir gods could not hold on for long before they were killed. As a result, the palace was completely destroyed. 80% of the buildings were destroyed. There were only 20 or so palaces full of cracks that were on the verge of collapse. There were more than 50,000 people in the palace, including 20,000 imperial guards, 20,000 servants, and guards. The remaining 10,000 people were the royal family members, imperial consecrators, and deity nation officials. However, after the heaven punishment sword formation operated for 30 breaths, more than 80% of the people in the palace were killed. Only about 10,000 people were still alive. However, most of them were seriously injured and covered in blood. Of course, those who could survive were basically experts, powerhouses, or people of noble status who were protected by many powerhouses. The 40,000 people who were killed were basically the imperial guards, servants, and guards. There were also some members of the royal family. Ji Tianxing didn't do anything. He just stood in the night sky and stared expressionlessly at the majestic temple in the middle of the palace. Secretly, he controlled the operation of the heaven-destroying sword formation and controlled the target of the 10,000 swords. That magnificent temple was the main hall of the royal palace, the most solemn and dignified place. Usually, the ruler of the raging flame country stayed there for a long period of time, discussing court matters with the civil and military officials. It was also in that temple. After the sword formation operated for 40 breaths, 95% of the buildings had disappeared, turning into dust and debris. The temple's defense had also completely collapsed. It was smashed into pieces by the tens of thousands of swords and collapsed into ruins. Only then did a few balls of dazzling divine light fly out from the ruins. Shua. A total of 9 balls of divine light enveloped more than 3,000 members of the divine clan and flew into the night sky. The 9 balls of divine light were unusually strong. Some of them were formed by many defensive artifacts, while others were formed by many powerhouses working together to form a shield. The 3,000 members of the divine clan within the light shield were basically members of the royal family, important officials, and experts of the palace. Under the control of many powerhouses, the 9 balls of divine light flew through the rain of swords and toward Ji Tianxing. While they were still tens of thousands of feet away, a middle-aged man's angry roar came from the golden ball of divine light at the forefront. Tianxing. Stop. The middle-aged man's voice was heavy and majestic, with a tinge of desolation, anxiety, and anger. Ji Tianxing ignored him and continued to operate the heaven-destroying sword formation expressionlessly. He continued to kill the rest of the people in the palace. After a few breaths, the 9 balls of divine light were even closer to him and stopped 10,000 feet away. At this time, the heaven-destroying sword formation had killed thousands of imperial guards, royal family members, servants, and guards. At this point, more than 50,000 people in the palace were almost all dead. Those who were still alive were only the 3,000 people in the 9 balls of divine light. Of course, Ji Tianxing also understood that those 3,000 people were the most respected and powerful people in the palace. Given another 10 breaths of time, he could operate the heaven-destroying sword formation to destroy the 9 balls of divine light and kill all 3,000 people. However, the middle-aged man's angry voice came from the golden ball of divine light at the forefront again. Tianxing, you have already won. I admit defeat. Why do you have to kill all of us? There was no doubt that the middle-aged man wearing a golden dragon robe and a luxurious crown was the king of the country of furious flames, Xue Chang'e. He was tall, had long arms, a square face, and a broad forehead. He had the appearance of a king, with thick eyebrows and big eyes. However, at this moment, he did not have any of his former majesty and loftiness. His brows were tightly knitted, and his expression was sorrowful. His eyes were dim. He had no choice. The palace that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years was destroyed in his generation. The royal family had lasted for tens of thousands of years and had given birth to thousands of bloodline descendants. Now, more than half of them were dead. After suffering such a heavy blow, if he could still remain calm, he would not have been subdued by Prince Lian. Ji Tianxing used his divine thoughts to control the heaven-destroying sword formation and temporarily stopped the attack. Suddenly, 15,000 giant swords floated in the night sky. The tips of the swords were pointed at the 3,000 people in the 9 balls of divine light. The formless sword intent suppressed everything and was incomparably violent. The pressure on the 3,000 people increased sharply. Their faces were pale, and their hearts were filled with fear. Ji Tianxing looked at Xue Chang'e expressionlessly. After sizing him up, he said, "You are the king of the country of raging flames?" Xue Chang'e nodded and said in a heavy tone, "That's right, I am." Ji Tianxing said again, "I think you know why I am here." Xue Chang'e was very tactful. He nodded again and said, "Of course I know. You are here for Prince Lian and me." Ji Tianxing frowned and was about to correct him. Xue Chang'e sighed and bowed deeply. He said in a sincere tone, "Young Master Tianxing, I have heard of your reputation and deeds not long after you stepped into the kingdom of raging flames. Your strength is strong, and your methods are ruthless. This monarch has never seen anyone like you before. Tonight's battle on Heavenly Dragon Mountain reached the peak and created a miracle. After tonight, your name will spread throughout the great Yang Empire and shock the world. Now that things have come to this, I have already suffered a crushing defeat. I don't want to say anything more. I only ask that young Master Tianxing be magnanimous and let these 3,000 people and the millions of people in the royal city go. No matter what, it's all my fault. I hope you don't implicate the innocent. You are the soaring dragon of the 9 heavens, the divine king's choice. You should have the bearing of a peerless powerhouse. You should not make things difficult for them. To show my sincerity, I am willing to commit suicide on the spot. I hope that young Master Tianxing can fulfill my wish." Chapter 3176. Xue Chang'e and Prince Lian had completely different styles of doing things. He wasn't as cunning and scheming as Prince Lian. In comparison, he was more honest, steady, and a man of his word. Of course, this was the basic quality of a monarch. But overall, Xue Chang'e was much more honest and straightforward. After speaking, he formed a seal with both hands and began to accumulate divine power into the godhead in his mind. As long as Ji Tianxing agreed and allowed him to commit suicide on the spot, sparing more than 3,000 royal family members and millions of citizens, he would shatter the godhead without hesitation. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing raised an eyebrow and asked, "How did a man of your temperament become Prince Lian's fan?" Xue Chang'e was startled, then calmly said, "I know you have a blood feud with the young prince, so you must be prejudiced against him. Perhaps in your eyes, the young prince is a scheming, sinister, and ruthless person. But to me, the young prince is my benefactor. Even if I repay him with my life, it won't be enough. If it weren't for little prince's help back then, with this monarch's shrewdness and conduct, how could this monarch have survived the struggle for the throne? How could I have become the monarch of divine nation? Back then, the young prince saved my life and helped me ascend to the throne. Now, even if I die, I can't repay his kindness." Ji Tianxing had heard about the matter between Xue Chang'e and Prince Lian from Nai Feiyun. He also learned about 70 to 80% of it from Lian Er's soul memories. He didn't want to hear more from Xue Chang'e, so he said in a low voice, "Xue Chang'e, there's no enmity between us. It's only because you work for Prince Lian that I have to deal with you. But now, I'll give you a chance. You don't have to commit suicide. As long as you hand over Prince Lian or tell me where he's hiding, I'll let you go. The members of the royal family around you, as well as the millions of civilians in the royal city, will be spared from death." The 3,000 people in the 9 balls of divine light immediately revealed expressions of joy, anticipation, and excitement. Their despairing hearts were also illuminated by the light of dawn. Everyone looked at Xue Chang'e, full of hope that he would agree. However, Xue Chang'e's body shook, and his expression became rather unsightly. Especially when he saw the eyes of the people around him become bright and passionate, his expression became even more gloomy. No. Xue Chang'e's tone was firm as he coldly shouted and righteously said, Ben Jun just said that even if I die, it will be difficult to repay little prince's kindness. How can I betray him? Ji Tianxing immediately frowned and sneered, you refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. This is not integrity, this is blind loyalty. Since you are not willing to betray Grand Prince Lian, then I will kill you and everyone else, and then destroy the entire royal city. After he finished speaking, he used his divine telekinesis to control the heaven-destroying sword formation and sped it up. The 15,000 giant swords floating above everyone's heads shone with a brilliant brilliance, releasing an incomparably violent sword intent that would pour down at any moment. The 3,000 people in the 9 clusters of godly light were in a life-and-death situation. Their faces were pale, and their hearts were filled with fear and despair. Many people couldn't bear the enormous pressure and were also afraid of the threat of death. They all opened their mouths to beg for mercy and persuade Xue Chang'e. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Your Majesty, now is not the time to let your emotions affect your decisions. Your Majesty, please think about the royal family and the officials. If everyone dies here, the God Nation's foundation will be destroyed. Your Majesty, even if you don't care about our lives, please spare everyone's lives for the sake of the millions of people in Royal City. Those millions of innocent people were innocent. How can you be so stubborn and cause everyone's deaths? Instantly, many officials of the God Nation began to persuade the king. Some of the royal family members with higher statuses even spoke harshly and reprimanded the king for being insensitive. Xue Chang'e's situation became extremely awkward. He had become the enemy of many royal family members and officials. Everyone blamed him for the deaths of their own people and the deaths of millions of people. This was human nature. Xue Chang'e wanted to be loyal and righteous, but everyone only wanted to live. Who would be willing to let their emotions affect their decisions? Ji Tianxing made it clear that as long as Xue Chang'e revealed Grand Prince Lian's whereabouts, he would spare everyone's lives. But Xue Chang'e didn't agree. He would rather die than betray Grand Prince Lian. No one blamed Ji Tianxing. They could only blame Xue Chang'e for being cold-blooded and heartless. Everyone became agitated and gradually turned from persuasion to crying, reprimanding, and begging. It was as if Xue Chang'e wanted to kill everyone, including the millions of people in Royal City. Xue Chang'e was so angry that his whole body trembled. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot. His qi and blood surged, and he spat out a mouthful of old blood. Ji Tianxing looked at him expressionlessly and said, I admire your integrity and honesty, but I despise your foolish loyalty. If you don't even know how to choose, you don't deserve to be the king of the raging flame divine nation. Reveal Grand Prince Lian's whereabouts, or implicate millions of people to die with you. Choose for yourself. No matter what, it was time to make a choice. Xue Chang'e couldn't avoid it. He endured unparalleled psychological pressure and slowly turned to look at the 9 balls of divine light. His gaze swept over the 3,000 royal family members. From everyone's expression and eyes, he saw the desire and urgency to survive, as well as anxiety and fear. Among them were his concubines and children, as well as his brothers, nephews, trusted ministers, and so on. In the face of death, everyone chose to plead and persuade him. After all, he owed Grand Prince Lian a favor, but they didn't. But everyone's life and death were now in his hands. After a long time, Xue Chang'e looked around and slowly retracted his gaze. He turned around, and his expression became dejected and helpless, as if he had aged a few decades in an instant. He smiled bitterly and lowered his head. He didn't look at Ji Tianxing's expression and said bitterly, forget it, forget it. Since I'm the king of the divine nation, how can I act willfully and willfully? At that time, I'll most likely become a fatuous king condemned by everyone. A ruthless king who doesn't care about the lives of his people. A sinner who caused the destruction of the divine nation. Hearing this, the 3,000 royal family members were obviously relieved. They all revealed expressions of relief. Everyone knew that Xue Changyi couldn't go against the will of the people and could only choose to compromise. As expected, Xue Changyi's voice was dry as he said, "Young Master Tianxing, I've agreed to your conditions, so please keep your promise." To be honest, when you fought with more than 10,000 soldiers and many divine lords self-destructed, Grand Prince Lian quietly left the royal city. He brought his trusted aides through the teleportation divine formation in the palace and directly arrived at the border of the raging flame county, Furious River City. Calculating the time, he should have already left Furious River City and entered the Rock Magus County in the south. This time, he lost to you, and his forces were almost wiped out. He can no longer establish himself in the raging flame divine nation. Next, he should return to the Great Yang Empire to recuperate for a while. As for where he will go, I don't know. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3177. After Xue Changyi finished speaking, he lowered his head even more. Under the dim divine light, one could vaguely see that his face was dark red and full of shame. His eyes were full of self-mockery and helplessness. It was clear that he didn't want to betray Prince Lian. But he had no choice but to reveal Prince Lian's whereabouts. This made him feel extremely guilty and condemned. To him, this was equivalent to a stain in his life that would be difficult to wash away in his lifetime. The 3,000+ royal family members didn't care about this. Everyone stared at Ji Tianxing, waiting for his verdict. Xue Changyi had already answered. Whether or not everyone could live depended on whether Ji Tianxing was satisfied. Clearly, Ji Tianxing wasn't satisfied. He frowned and asked, "That's it? I'm not surprised that Prince Lian escaped in time. But you're one of Prince Lian's most trusted aides. How could you not know where he went? Xue Changyi, I think you're honest and straightforward. But you hid something and wanted to get away with it." Seeing that Ji Tianxing was very dissatisfied and angry, the 3,000+ royal family members' expressions changed. They were so anxious that their foreheads were covered in sweat. Many people started to persuade Xue Changyi again. There were even some royal family members with higher status and seniority who started to reprimand and complain about Xue Changyi. Xue Changyi was under great pressure. His face became more and more unsightly. Seeing that everyone was agitated, he could only explain to Ji Tianxing, "Gongzi Tianxing, I really didn't know about Prince Lian's plan. You also know that Prince Lian is very suspicious and scheming. He's very shrewd." After knowing that the army was defeated, he didn't even wait for the scouts to investigate the situation and left with his trusted aides. Moreover, he didn't even say goodbye to me when he left. I only found out about this after hearing the reports from my subordinates. Seeing that Xue Changyi didn't seem to be lying, and Ji Tianxing analyzed that Prince Lian would have done so given his nature. Thus, he stopped questioning Xue Changyi. He nodded and said, "Okay, I'll believe you this time. In the future, if this sovereign finds out that you lied to this sovereign, don't blame this sovereign for making another trip to the capital and personally taking your dog life." Xue Changyi hurriedly shook his head and said, "I dare not deceive young Master Tianxing. If this lord's words are false, I'm at your disposal." Ji Tianxing didn't say anything more. He frowned and thought about where Prince Lian might be hiding. He had refined the memories of Lian Er's soul, so he knew many of Prince Lian's secrets. At this moment, Xue Changyi hesitated for a moment and spoke to interrupt his thoughts. "Gongzi Tianxing, I've already followed your request and revealed Prince Lian's whereabouts. Shouldn't you fulfill your promise?" Ji Tianxing collected his thoughts, glanced at him, and said indifferently, "This monarch is a man of his word. I will naturally fulfill my promise." With that, he waved his arm and removed the heaven-destroying sword formation. The 20,000 swords that had been hovering in the night sky and covering Royal City immediately disappeared without a trace. Instantly, Royal City, which had been illuminated by the sword light until it was as bright as day, also became dim. The 3,000 royal family members looked as if they had been pardoned. They revealed expressions of joy as if they had just survived a disaster. The tens of thousands of people in Royal City had been trembling with fear and despair. Now that the sword formation had disappeared, they all breathed a sigh of relief. Countless people cried out in surprise and whispered in each other's ears. Many people saw that the once dazzling palace had been reduced to ruins. Everyone was discussing and guessing what had happened in the royal palace. Who was so powerful that they could destroy the royal palace? Could it be that Tianxing, who had been rumored to be the god of slaughter? At the same time, Xue Changyi saw that Ji Tianxing was a man of his word and also breathed a sigh of relief. He hurriedly bowed and said, "Thank you, young Master Tianxing, for your mercy." Ji Tianxing looked at him expressionlessly and said in a low voice, "Xue Changyi, I'll give you a word of advice. Grand Prince Lian opposed this monarch, and he won't live long. You don't have to be blindly loyal to him. You must always remember that you are the monarch of the raging flame divine country. You don't have the right to be willful. You must put the overall situation and the divine country and its hundreds of millions of people before you make any decision. Otherwise, you will destroy the raging flame divine country sooner or later." Xue Changyi was startled. He didn't expect that Ji Tianxing, who was his enemy, would give him pointers. After frowning and thinking for a moment, he remembered Ji Tianxing's words in his heart and sincerely thanked him. "Thank you, young Master Tianxing, for your pointers. This monarch will definitely remember it." Ji Tianxing didn't say anything else and expressionlessly asked, "Where is the teleportation array leading to the border of Raging Flame County?" Xue Changyi knew that he was leaving Royal City and was secretly relieved. He hurriedly replied, "It's in the Huiyang Divine Palace. That's Grand Prince Lian's residence in Royal City. Many years ago, he had this monarch build that divine array in the Huiyang Divine Palace." Ji Tianxing immediately frowned and said in a deep voice, "Damn it. With Grand Prince Lian's way of doing things, he will definitely have that divine array destroyed after he leaves. Quickly take this monarch there." Xue Changyi also understood his meaning and didn't dare to delay. He hurriedly took him to the Huiyang Divine Palace. In just 2 short breaths, the two of them teleported 100 miles away and landed in front of a magnificent palace. The guards and servants around the palace had already fled in all directions, their whereabouts unknown. The two of them directly used an escape technique and entered the underground hall of the Divine Palace. They saw that in the middle of the hall, there was a huge teleportation array that was shining with a dim white light. Dozens of elite heavenly gods were around the teleportation array, working together to destroy it. Seeing Xue Changyi and Ji Tianxing arrive, those people were stunned and stopped what they were doing. After coming back to their senses, they turned around and fled without hesitation. Ji Tianxing didn't pay attention to those escaping heavenly gods. He didn't even have the interest to chase after them. He used the divine eye mystic art to observe the array and quickly saw the situation. "Fortunately, we came in time. These people are weak and only destroyed some insignificant things." While talking, Ji Tianxing started to cast spells to repair the teleportation array. After 15 minutes, the teleportation array was fully repaired. Ji Tianxing stepped into the teleportation array and walked toward the blazing white teleportation door. Before leaving, he threw down a final sentence. "Xue Changyi, you better pray that we don't meet again. Otherwise, it will be a disaster for you." After saying that, he stepped into the teleportation door and disappeared. Xue Changyi stood on the spot and stared at the light door in a daze. He pondered for a long time before turning around and leaving. When he returned to the palace, more than 3,000 royal family members and ministers were looking at him with burning eyes. Seeing him return alone and not seeing Ji Tianxing's trace, everyone opened their mouths to ask. After knowing that Ji Tianxing had left the royal city through the teleportation array, everyone finally relaxed and erupted into cheers and discussions. Xue Changyi, however, couldn't feel happy. He looked at the ruined palace with a blank expression and his eyes dimmed. Chapter 3178. Although the lives of Xue Changyi, the royal family, and the officials were saved, the palace was destroyed. However, the destruction of the palace and the deaths of tens of thousands of imperial guards, servants, and guards were also a huge loss. It would take a long time to rebuild the palace and reorganize the imperial guards, servants, and guards. It would consume a lot of manpower and resources. This was a heavy blow to the raging flame divine kingdom. Just treat it as a punishment for me. Give me an unforgettable lesson. Xue Changyi sighed and began to issue orders, dispatching the officials and the royal family to prepare to rebuild the palace. The royal family and the officials who had narrowly escaped death were no longer hostile to Xue Chang'e. They happily accepted the orders and went to carry out the mission. Soon, the news spread from the palace and spread throughout the royal city. 2 hours later, at daybreak, all the people in the city knew the whole story. When everyone found out that there was only one person among the thousands of soldiers and strong enemies they had expected, they were all stunned. And when they learned that the person who destroyed the palace and slaughtered tens of thousands of people was Grim Reaper Tianxing, they were even more terrified. Later, another piece of news spread that before Tianxing broke into the royal city, he had fought a decisive battle with more than 10,000 soldiers on Celestial Dragon Mountain. In the end, Tianxing won a complete victory, killing more than 10,000 soldiers and forcing many divine lords to self-detonate. This made the people in the city even more shocked. It was as if they were listening to a heavenly book. This series of news set off a shocking hurricane in the royal city, igniting everyone's enthusiasm. The commoners were suddenly enlightened. No wonder there was a divine light that shot into the sky and covered half of the night sky. More people rejoiced and felt a lingering fear. Fortunately, Grim Reaper Tianxing's target was clear and he didn't attack the people of the royal city. Otherwise, if that sword array had gone all out, the entire royal city would have been turned into ruins, and all the people would have died. Thus, the people felt more and more reverence for Grim Reaper Tianxing. Many people were thinking about the rumors circulating in the Divine Kingdom, saying that Tianxing was a villain and a Grim Reaper who killed people like scything flax. It seemed that the rumors weren't true. That Grim Reaper didn't kill the innocent and had the demeanor of a powerhouse. As time passed, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days passed. The news of the battle and the destruction of the royal palace also spread out of the royal city and spread throughout the Raging Flame Divine Kingdom. A few days later, this series of news spread out of the Raging Flame Divine Nation and spread to the surrounding countries, including the Great Yang Empire. As a result, Ji Tianxing's reputation as the god of slaughter spread far and wide. The people of various countries were discussing his achievements and miracles. When all kinds of news spread out of the Raging Flame Divine Country, Ji Tianxing was also about to leave the Raging Flame Divine Country. That night, he left King City through the teleportation formation and arrived at the border of Raging Flame County, appearing in Raging River City. Prince Lian did not disappoint him. As soon as he stepped out of the teleportation array and appeared on a tall altar, he was besieged by dozens of elites. There were a total of more than 70 people, all of whom had the strength of 8th level celestial deity realm and above. The leaders were 4 lower divine lords. Without a doubt, these people were all Prince Lian's subordinates, and they had been ordered to guard this place. Prince Lian had given them the task of killing anyone who walked out of the divine array. The result was indisputable. Ji Tianxing easily killed more than 70 experts, including the 4 lower divine lords. Then, he left Raging River City before dawn and continued south. The Raging Flame County was located in the center of the Raging Flame Divine Country, and the Rockwitch County was to the south. Further south, he still had to pass through 5 counties to leave the Raging Flame Divine Country and enter the Great Yang Empire. Ji Tianxing calculated the time. If he flew at full speed, it would take him about 20 days to leave the Raging Flame Divine Country. This way, he would definitely not be able to catch up to Prince Lian. Wasting so much time would also give Prince Lian more time to prepare. On the way, he had been pondering and analyzing. Prince Lian was thoroughly defeated in the Blood Flame and Raging Flame Divine Nations, and his subordinate forces were all eradicated by me. Although he had secretly recruited a few forces in the other 2 divine kingdoms and built up a team of forces, the divine kingdom as compared to the Blood Flame and Raging Flame Divine Nations, his foundation in those 2 divine nations is still shallow. Thus, when he fled the Raging Flame Divine Kingdom, he definitely wouldn't go to those 2 divine kingdoms. His only choice is to escape back to the Great Yang Empire. This was the first step of Ji Tianxing's analysis. It was reasonable and basically the same as what Xue Chang'e had said. Then, Ji Tianxing began to ponder another problem. Prince Lian's injuries should be more or less healed. After many battles, he's already seen my strength and knows that he's no match for me. Therefore, He'll definitely hide and recuperate after escaping back to the Great Yang Empire. He'll only dare to seek revenge after he's accumulated enough strength. Before he's confident enough, he'll definitely hide. But where will he hide? The imperial capital of the Great Yang Empire? Or was it some desolate place with no one around? Or the headquarters of the Heavenly Union sect? The imperial capital of the Great Yang Empire was the territory of the Great Yang Emperor. Prince Lian and the Great Yang Emperor had a grudge against each other for killing his mother. Moreover, he had caused a huge commotion in the Blood Flame and Raging Flame Divine Nations. Otherwise, the Great Yang Emperor would definitely find a reason to punish him after seeing his wild ambitions. As for hiding in a desolate place, Ji Tianxing did not think it was likely. Prince Lian was used to being high and mighty. He lived like a prince and could command many experts at any time. If he hid in a desolate place, he would be safe. However, he and his subordinates would be cut off from the outside world. Moreover, the conditions in a desolate place were harsh and not suitable for recuperation. After thinking about it, the most likely place Prince Lian could hide was the headquarters of the Heavenly Union sect. Prince Lian's biggest backer is the Heavenly Union sect. He'll only be safe and convenient if he hides in the headquarters. Moreover, he might be hoping that I won't dare to look for him because of the Heavenly Union sect's power and prestige. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself as a mocking sneer appeared on his face. Prince Lian, oh, Prince Lian, it's useless even if you hide in the Great Yang Emperor's palace, let alone the headquarters of the Heavenly Union sect. If I want to kill you, you won't be able to escape death no matter where you run to. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing decided to leave the Raging Flame Divine Nation as soon as possible. Flying was too slow. He planned to look for a teleportation divine formation after entering Rockwich County. It should save him a lot of time. After entering the Great Yang Empire, he would head to the headquarters of the Heavenly Union sect. At that time, he would try to kill Prince Lian and end this grudge. He would try his best not to implicate the innocent. If the Heavenly Union sect was tactful and did not interfere in his grudge with Prince Lian, they would be spared. If the Heavenly Union sect interfered, protected Prince Lian, or even attacked him with all their might, he did not mind destroying the Heavenly Union sect. Chapter 3179. Great Yang Empire. This was a vast and resource-rich super-divine nation. At the same time, it was also the northernmost empire in the Tianbei region. It had been tens of thousands of years since the Great Yang Empire was established. It could be said that its foundation was extremely strong. There were 18 subsidiary divine nations under its command and hundreds of billions of people. The Great Yang Empire was located in the center, and the 18 divine nations surrounded it, forming a protective formation. As for the Great Yang Empire's territory, it was about 5 times the size of the Bloodfire Divine Nation and more than 4 times the Raging Flame Divine Nation. Until now, the Great Yang Empire had 78 counties, thousands of main cities, and tens of thousands of strategic towns. The Yang royal family that ruled the empire had been passed down for more than 50,000 years and was a veritable ancient noble family. The Yang bloodline was very noble and powerful. In terms of grade, it could reach the supreme grade monarch level and was very close to the quasi-king level. As long as one was a descendant of the Yang family, as long as one did not have any congenital defects and had normal aptitude and comprehension, one could basically become a high-rank godly lord. In fact, some extremely talented geniuses even had a glimmer of hope to become an unparalleled godly king. It was a pity that since ancient times, the Yang family had only produced one godly king. That was more than 40,000 years ago, and that godly king expert had long disappeared without a trace. Ever since the Great Yang Empire was established, the Yang family had had a great goal since the first emperor. That was to nurture an unparalleled godly king. Only then could they lead the Great Yang Empire to the peak, crush the other empires, and laugh proudly in the Tianbei region. However, this wish had never been realized. For 30,000 years, the Yang royal family had never produced a godly king expert. The strongest were only the previous emperors. They had all reached the limit of the divine lord realm and were only one step away from becoming a godly king. However, that one step was like a natural chasm that could not be crossed. After the previous emperors passed down the throne, they focused on cultivating in seclusion and worked hard to break through to the godly king realm. However, there were 3 old emperors who had cultivated for thousands of years and still could not break through. They lost the patience to cultivate in seclusion and left the great Yang Empire to travel the boundless heaven continent in search of opportunities to break through. No one knew if they succeeded or if they died outside. In short, there was no news of those old emperors. Until now, only the previous emperor and the emperor before that were still in seclusion in the great Yang Empire. The previous emperor was the father of the current emperor of Great Yang. He was known as the retired emperor. The previous emperor was the grandfather of Great Yang's emperor. He was known as the patriarch. The Great Yang Empire had also recruited many talented people, crouching tigers, and hidden dragons. It was unknown how many top-notch high-rank divine lords they had recruited. Even the young emperor of Great Yang was a 9th stage higher divine lord. His strength was slightly stronger than Prince Lian's. At this moment, the capital of Great Yang, which covered an area of 1,000 miles, was shrouded in the darkness of the night. Great Yang's imperial capital was extremely prosperous. More than 15 million Protoss citizens lived there. Even though it was late at night, the imperial capital was still brightly lit and the streets were bustling with people. Therefore, Great Yang's capital was known as the Nightless City. This was also a place of pilgrimage for the surrounding 18 divine nations. It was the highest-level divine Dao Holy Land. At this moment, the imperial palace in Great Yang's capital was still as dazzling and magnificent as ever. Deep in the palace, in a grand and luxurious study, a young man dressed in a 5-clawed golden dragon robe and a crown with 9 dragons on his head was sitting behind a divine jade desk. He was resting with his eyes closed. This tall and burly young man was dark red in color. He had the majestic and domineering air of a king. He was the current leader of the Yang family. He was Yang Yongning, the current emperor of the Great Yang Empire. Hundreds of memorials and jade slips were piled into a small mountain on the desk in front of him. Countless affairs of the empire were waiting for him to deal with. It looked like he was tired, so he closed his eyes and rested for a while. However, in truth, he was a 9th stage divine lord. He would not have any problems even if he did not eat, drink, or rest for 100 years. At this moment, he was listening to a black-robed man's report. The black-robed middle-aged man was shrouded in black mist. His face could not be seen clearly, and he seemed exceptionally mysterious. Moreover, his strength was also at the 9th stage divine lord realm. His foundation was even stronger than Great Yang's emperor. This was the governor of Black Flame. He was also one of Great Yang's emperor's most trusted aides. After all, Black Flame was an intelligence organization of Great Yang's imperial family. It was responsible for investigating and monitoring the movements of the 18 divine nations. The Black Flame governor bowed respectfully and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, I've sent people to check repeatedly. The news from the Blood Flame Divine Nations and Raging Flame Divine Nations is indeed true. The foreign youth named Tianxing went all the way south from the Blood Flame Divine Nation. He was unstoppable and created miracles time and time again. His battle record is very exaggerated. Now, that person has left Raging Flame Capital and is rushing toward the Empire's border. He should be entering the Empire soon." The Black Flame governor had reported a lot of information before. These few sentences were just a summary. The emperor was silent for a moment. He did not comment. Instead, he asked, "What about old 8th? He was defeated so miserably. He should be running back like a stray dog, right?" The old 8th he was referring to was the 8th prince, who was the current Prince Lian. The Black Flame governor said calmly, "Prince Lian left Raging Flame Capital on the night of the final battle and returned to the Empire. Just last night, he returned to the Empire with his followers and confidants. According to the informants at the border, Prince Lian did not seem to be returning to the imperial capital. He seemed to be heading toward the heavenly sect." The emperor sneered and said, No matter how big the imperial capital is, it is not his home. Although the 8th prince's mansion is still there, it is covered with dust and has been abandoned. How can he come back? Now, other than the Heavenly Union sect, Where else can he go? The Black Flame governor did not comment on this. He just asked calmly, Your Majesty, please make a decision. How should we deal with Prince Lian? The emperor leaned back on the divine jade chair and sneered mockingly. Old Eighth has been defeated so miserably. Let him hide and recuperate for a few years. He is still too inexperienced. He thinks he is doing things secretly, but how can he escape from my eyes? When I sent him to the Bloodflame Divine Nation, I guessed that he was harboring evil intentions and plotting revenge. When he was gathering forces in the various divine nations and building a team, I pretended not to know and turned a blind eye. After all, those forces are not strong enough to threaten me. I just ascended the throne not long ago, and I just killed Old Fourth and their mother. If I punish Old Eighth, the people will scold me for being heartless and cold-blooded. I didn't expect that a young man from another race called Tianxing would suddenly appear and have a conflict with Old Eighth. Moreover, that kid is so brave that he actually destroyed Old Eighth's force and defeated him so miserably. Speaking of which, I have to thank that kid for eliminating Old Eighth's force for me. The Black Flame governor understood the emperor's meaning and asked again, How do you plan to deal with that kid, Your Majesty? The emperor frowned and said in a deep voice, I don't want to deal with him, but the Great Yang Empire does not welcome him. Chapter 3180. Ji Tianxing knew that it was unlikely that Grand Prince Lian was still in Yunwu Pass. However, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack for him to kill Grand Prince Lian now. Under such circumstances, he had to try as long as there was a slight possibility. Otherwise, he would regret it if he missed the best chance to kill Grand Prince Lian. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing flew across the night sky, and soon, he had traveled 500 miles and arrived at the Cloud Mist Pass. There was a deep canyon in front of him. It was filled with towering trees and thick clouds. On both sides of the mountain were 3,000 feet tall, extremely steep and dangerous. However, the two mountains were not far from each other. They were only about 100 miles apart. The soldiers of the Great Yang Empire had built a floating city at the peak of the two mountains to connect the two mountains. The floating city floating in the sea of clouds was only 100 miles in radius, but it looked very prosperous with many palaces and tall buildings. There were also flat open spaces on both sides of the mountains. Barracks and armory were built. 180,000 border soldiers were stationed in the barracks and the floating city. Even though it was late at night, there were many soldiers patrolling around the floating city. The city was still lit. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing used his invisibility divine ability and flew silently toward the floating city. What surprised him was that the floating city and the two barracks were protected by Supreme Monarch-level divine arrays. The defense divine array of the floating city was fully activated. It shone brilliantly in the night sky. He had to break the divine array if he wanted to enter the floating city. Therefore, he did not waste any time. He dodged a few patrolling soldiers and started to break the divine array. It was not difficult for him to break the Supreme Monarch-level divine array, but it would take a long time. Moreover, he had to keep using his divine power while breaking the divine array. It was difficult to hide. Half an hour passed. Ji Tianxing finally broke the divine array and tore a hole in the five-colored light shield. He had just passed through the hole and entered the floating city when he saw a large number of soldiers gathered in the open space in front of him. There were more than 1,000 elite black-armored soldiers led by 4 low-rank divine lords. They were in a neat formation and were waiting for him. At the front of the battle formation, there were 3 powerhouses who were also staring at him coldly. He was an upper divine monarch in armor and his strength had reached the 7th heaven realm. He looked like a general guarding the Cloud Mist Pass. The other 2 high-level monarchs were dressed in luxurious robes and they exuded a dignified and noble aura. Their strength had also reached the 8th degree realm. It was obvious that Ji Tianxing had exposed himself and was discovered by the other party. Could it be that another battle was about to break out? Ji Tianxing thought to himself. He was not afraid of fighting. If they really fought, he could destroy the entire Yunwu Pass within 2 hours, wiping out hundreds of thousands of soldiers. However, was there a need to start a massacre? If he really killed the 180,000 soldiers of Cloud Mist Pass, the Emperor of Great Yang would definitely fly into a rage and order everyone to surround and annihilate him. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing decided not to make a move first and act according to the circumstances. At this moment, the two powerhouses in luxurious robes in the lead spoke first. An old man with white hair and a beard looked at Ji Tianxing expressionlessly and said, "If I'm not mistaken, you're Tianxing, aren't you?" Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and asked, "The two of you don't look like the guards of Cloud Mist Pass. You look more like you're waiting for me here." The other middle-aged man nodded and said with a faint smile, "You're smart to be able to guess this. To tell you the truth, Elder Yuan and I are His Majesty's Imperial Envoys. We were ordered to wait for you here and pass on a message to you." Realization dawned on Ji Tianxing. At the same time, more questions appeared in his mind. Great Yang's Imperial Envoys? They've been waiting for me here. He frowned. He had a bad feeling about this. After all, he had caused an earth-shattering battle in the Blood Flame and Raging Flame Divine nations. He had even killed the Blood Flame Divine Sovereign. The Great Yang Emperor had eyes and ears all over the divine nations. He must have known the truth long ago. However, the Great Yang Emperor had never asked about it and pretended not to know anything. Now that he had come to Cloud Mist Pass, the Great Yang Emperor had sent someone to wait for him here and pass on a message. No matter how he looked at it, this was not good news. As expected. The white-bearded old man stared at Ji Tianxing and said in a dignified tone, "Tianxing, the matter between you and Prince Lian is a personal grudge. You caused such a huge commotion in the Blood Flame and Raging Flame divine nations. It's also a matter between you and the two divine nations. His Majesty is well aware of all this, but he didn't interfere. This is because His Majesty is a benevolent and righteous ruler. He only protects the citizens of the Great Yang Empire and won't interfere with the internal affairs of the other divine nations. However, it's impossible for you to break into Cloud Mist Pass and even enter the Great Yang Empire tonight. His Majesty has said that you're not welcome in the Great Yang Empire. Please leave." The middle-aged man said in a dignified tone, "Tianxing, no matter how powerful you are or how bloodthirsty you are, His Majesty can ignore you as long as you don't threaten the Great Yang Empire. However, if you enter the Great Yang Empire, you'll endanger the safety of the citizens. This is not allowed. I hope you know your place. Don't step into the Great Yang Empire and don't challenge His Majesty's authority. Otherwise, you'll suffer His Majesty's wrath and face the encirclement of the entire empire. You'd better think about it carefully." The two imperial envoys' tone was unfriendly and their expressions were arrogant. However, they were here on behalf of the Great Yang Emperor. Naturally, they had to be imposing and not tarnish the Great Yang Emperor's reputation. Moreover, they did not say anything overboard. Ji Tianxing was not angry. He had expected this outcome. He sneered and said, "In that case, please tell the Great Yang Emperor that I won't harm the citizens of the Great Yang Empire. I'm only here to hunt down Prince Lian. I'm getting rid of an evil for the people and also helping the Great Yang Emperor resolve one of his worries." Upon hearing this, the expressions of the two imperial envoys and the divine general changed. They looked furious. "Bastard! How dare you criticize His Majesty?" The golden-armored divine general shouted angrily. The two imperial envoys' expressions darkened as well. They said coldly, "Brat, do you know the consequences of slandering His Majesty? Tianxing, no matter how you quibble or plead for mercy, His Majesty's decree cannot be changed. If you know what's good for you, turn around and leave now. Don't even think about taking half a step into the Great Yang Empire." Ji Tianxing's smile became even more mocking. He nodded and said, "It seems like you know about the grudge between Prince Lian and Great Yang's Emperor. Otherwise, why would you be so angry? In that case, I only have one question. If you give me an answer, I'll turn around and leave." The two imperial envoys fell silent. After a brief discussion, the white-bearded old man said, "Ask whatever you want. However, whether we're willing to answer is our business." Ji Tianxing did not beat around the bush. He asked directly, "Is Prince Lian at Yunwu Pass? Did he pass by this place? Which direction did he go?" This question shouldn't make things difficult for you. In fact, you should be happy to hear it. The fastest mobile version of the website. Chapter 3181. The rock which Commandery Princess thought that Ji Tianxing had other intentions. It was either to rob or to kill. After all, this person was known as the killing god. The rock which Commandery Princess naturally thought that it was related to killing. Who knew that Ji Tianxing's request would be so simple? He just wanted to borrow the teleportation formation. Hearing this, the rock Magus Infanta relaxed. Her heart that had been hanging in the air also calmed down. He let out a long sigh and a smile appeared on his face. He said politely, "Ahaha. So it's about this. I thought it was something else. Mr. Tianxing, don't worry. How can I not help you with such a small matter? Do you want to use it now or when? How about this, since it's your first time in the Rock Witch Commandery, as the host, I have to be a good host and treat you well." The last sentence was, of course, a meaningless courtesy. The Rock Witch Commandery Princess's real thoughts were that she wanted this killing god to leave quickly. How could she waste any more time with him? However, she could not show it. She was very cautious in front of Ji Tianxing. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing's reply allowed him to heave a sigh of relief. "Don't waste any more time. I will leave now." The Rock Witch Commandery Princess finally confirmed that Ji Tianxing only had this request and no other purpose. She was completely relieved. Without hesitation, she opened the door of the secret chamber and led Ji Tianxing out of the secret chamber. "Mr. Tianxing, please follow me." Then, the two of them passed through the dark tunnel and entered the center of the underground palace. They entered a spacious hall. There were 8 lower divine lords guarding the hall. They were all cultivating in their own secret chambers. Once someone approached the hall, the 8 divine lords would be awakened. Although they did not know Ji Tianxing, they saw the Rock Witch Commandery Princess leading Ji Tianxing into the hall. Then, they stayed in the secret chamber and did not move. The dark hall was silent. There was only a large formation on the ground in the middle of the hall. The Rock Witch Commandery Princess walked to the center of the formation and personally cast a spell to activate the formation. Soon, a white door of light that was more than 10 feet tall appeared in the middle of the formation. Rock Magus Countess finished casting the spell and bowed to Ji Tianxing. She said, "Young Master Tianxing, the teleportation divine formation has been opened. It can reach Xiangliu City at the border." Ji Tianxing nodded. He stepped into the formation and walked into the teleportation gate. Shua. With a flash of white light, Ji Tianxing's figure disappeared into the light gate. Seeing that he had really left, the Rock Witch Infanta's tense nerves relaxed. She let out a long breath and wiped the cold on her forehead. Phew. Fortunately, this death god only wanted to borrow the teleportation array and had no other intentions. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. After muttering to himself, he began to close the teleportation divine array. When he left the hall, he muttered to himself, "Although this god of death's strength is unfathomable, his nature doesn't seem to be as cruel as the rumors say." The distance between Rock Witch County City and Willow City was tens of millions of miles. With Ji Tianxing's speed, he would need to fly for at least 3 days to arrive. However, using the teleportation divine array, he only needed a breath's time to arrive. When he appeared in Willow City, he was standing in an underground palace. There were several hundred guards standing guard around the palace, and there was even a lower divine lord overseeing it. When everyone saw Ji Tianxing suddenly appear, they were all stunned for a moment. Then, they surrounded him. Vigilantly, they gripped their swords and blades, staring at Ji Tianxing fiercely. Once Ji Tianxing showed hostility and killing intent, they would not hesitate to attack. If Ji Tianxing showed any signs of cowardice, fear, or guilt, they would surround him and capture him. However, Ji Tianxing ignored them and left the underground palace expressionlessly. He used the teleportation technique and left Willow City in a flash. He continued to fly towards the south. The hundreds of guards in the underground palace all looked at each other in dismay, their hearts filled with doubt. A guard captain plucked up his courage and asked the low-level divine lord, "Commander, who was that foreign race kid? Why didn't we stop him and interrogate him?" The low-level divine lord glared at him and shouted coldly, "Are you out of your mind? That person's strength is unfathomable. Do you want to die? Moreover, he came from Rockwich County City. He must have been approved by the princess. Why do we need to interrogate him? The guard captain shrunk his neck and quickly apologized. Not long after, Ji Tianxing left Rockwich County City. 3 days later, he arrived at Kushengnan County City. This time, he did the same thing. He quietly broke into the princess's mansion to borrow the teleportation divine array. To his surprise, the princess was not in the mansion. He did not know where she had gone to do some errands. The person with the highest status in the princess's mansion was the princess's son. He was a frivolous and dissolute playboy. Ji Tianxing used a little trick to capture the princess's son. He was so scared that he almost wet his pants. He did not even say his name, but the princess's son was so scared that he begged for mercy and agreed to open the teleportation divine array. This made things even simpler. Ji Tianxing carried the princess's son and entered the underground hall. The princess's son ordered the guards guarding the altar to activate the divine teleportation array as soon as possible. After a while, the teleportation divine array was opened. Ji Tianxing let go of the princess's son and left. Just like that, he quickly left Kushengnan County and continued to rush towards the south. In the next few days, he passed through a few counties and used the same method. The princess of each county was intimidated by his name. They did not even dare to resist or call for help. The few princesses' son sensibly opened the teleportation divine array and sent him off respectfully. Unknowingly, 10 days passed. On the 10th night, Ji Tianxing finally left the raging flame divine nation and stepped onto the border of the Great Yang Empire. What appeared in front of him was a boundless and majestic mountain range. One after another, giant peaks more than 2,000 feet tall stood on the ground. Half of the mountain was shrouded in clouds and mist. This was the border between the raging flame divine nation and the Great Yang Empire, the famous Cloud Mountain Range. 500 miles in front of Ji Tianxing was the Cloud Mountain Pass, the northern border of the Great Yang Empire. More than 100,000 soldiers were stationed there, and there were high-level divine lords guarding it. Ji Tianxing flew through the night sky at a moderate speed and rushed towards the Cloud Mountain Pass. Along the way, he was still thinking to himself, Prince Lian should have used the teleportation divine arrays in the various counties to escape the raging flame divine nation. He left 2 hours earlier than me, and I did not waste any time. I should not be far from him. Given his mentality, he should be relaxed after escaping the raging flame divine nation and finally entering the Great Yang Empire. The Cloud Mountain Pass was guarded by a large army and high-level divine lords. It could be said that it was very safe. He should have escaped into the Cloud Mountain Pass and used the teleportation divine array there to return to the Great Yang Empire. I have to go to the Cloud Mountain Pass to investigate. If he has not left, that would be great. Even if he has already left the Cloud Mountain Pass, I can still find out where he went. Chapter 3182. Ji Tianxing knew that it was unlikely that Grand Prince Lian was still in Yunwu Pass. However, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack for him to kill Grand Prince Lian now. Under such circumstances, he had to try as long as there was a slight possibility. Otherwise, he would regret it if he missed the best chance to kill Grand Prince Lian. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing flew across the night sky, and soon, he had traveled 500 miles and arrived at the Cloud Mist Pass. There was a deep canyon in front of him. It was filled with towering trees and thick clouds. On both sides of the mountain were 3,000 feet tall, extremely steep and dangerous. However, the two mountains were not far apart, only about 100 miles apart. The soldiers of the Great Yang Empire had built a floating city at the peak of the two mountains to connect the two mountains. The floating city floating in the sea of clouds was only 100 miles in radius, but it looked very prosperous with many palaces and tall buildings. There were also flat open spaces on both sides of the mountains. Barracks and armory were built. 180,000 border soldiers were stationed in the barracks and the floating city. Although it was late at night, there were still many soldiers patrolling around the floating city. The city was still lit. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing used his invisibility divine ability and flew toward the floating city silently. What surprised him was that the floating city and the 2 barracks were protected by Supreme Monarch-level divine arrays. The defense divine array of the floating city was fully activated. It shone with dazzling divine light in the night sky. He had to break the divine array if he wanted to enter the floating city. Therefore, he did not waste any time. He dodged a few patrolling soldiers and started to break the divine array. It was not difficult for him to break the Supreme Monarch-level divine array, but it would take him a long time. Moreover, he had to keep using his divine power while breaking the divine array. It was difficult to hide. Half an hour passed. Ji Tianxing finally broke the divine array and tore a hole in the 5-colored light shield. He had just passed through the hole and entered the floating city when he saw a large number of soldiers gathered in the open space in front of him. There were thousands of elite black-armored soldiers led by 4 low-rank divine lords. They were in a neat formation and were waiting for him. There were 3 powerhouses at the front of the battle formation. They were also staring at him coldly. One of them was a high-rank divine lord in armor. His strength was at the 7th heaven realm. He looked like a general guarding Yunwu Pass. The other 2 high-rank divine lords were dressed in luxurious robes. They exuded a dignified and noble aura. Their strength was at the 8th heaven realm. It was obvious that Ji Tianxing had exposed himself and was discovered by the enemy. Was he going to have to fight another battle? Ji Tianxing thought to himself. He wasn't afraid of fighting. If a fight really broke out, he could destroy the entire Yunwu Pass within 2 hours, wiping out hundreds of thousands of soldiers. However, was there a need to kill them all? If he really killed the 180,000 soldiers of Cloud Mist Pass, the Great Yang Emperor would definitely fly into a rage and order all forces to surround and annihilate him. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing decided not to make a move first and act according to the circumstances. At this moment, the 2 powerhouses in luxurious robes in the lead spoke first. A white-haired old man from the God clan looked at Ji Tianxing expressionlessly and said, "If I'm not mistaken, you're Tianxing, aren't you?" Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and asked, "The 2 of you don't look like the guards of Yunwu Pass. Are you waiting for me here?" The other middle-aged man nodded and said with a smile, "You're smart to be able to guess this. To tell you the truth, Elder Yuan and I are His Majesty's Imperial Envoys. We were ordered to wait for you here and pass on a message to you." Realization dawned on Ji Tianxing. At the same time, more questions appeared in his mind. Great Yang's Emperor's Imperial Envoys? They're waiting for me here. He frowned. He had a bad feeling about this. After all, he had caused an earth-shattering battle in the Blood Flame and Raging Flame Divine Nations. He had even killed the Blood Flame Divine Sovereign. The Great Yang Emperor had eyes and ears all over the Divine Nations. He must have known the truth long ago. However, the Great Yang Emperor had never asked about it and pretended not to know anything. Now that he had come to Yunwu Pass, the Great Yang Emperor had sent someone to wait for him here and pass on a message. No matter how he looked at it, this was not good news. As expected. The white-haired old man stared at Ji Tianxing and said in a dignified tone, "Tianxing, the matter between you and Prince Lian is a personal grudge. You caused such a huge commotion in the Blood Flame and Raging Flame Divine Nations. It's also a matter between you and the 2 divine nations. His Majesty is well aware of all this, but he didn't interfere. His Majesty is a benevolent and righteous ruler. He only protects the citizens of the Great Yang Empire and won't interfere with the internal affairs of the other divine nations. However, it's impossible for you to break into Yunwu Pass and even step into the Great Yang Empire tonight. His Majesty has said that you're not welcome in the Great Yang Empire. Please leave." The middle-aged man said in a dignified tone, "Tianxing, no matter how powerful you are or how bloodthirsty you are, His Majesty can ignore you as long as you don't threaten the Great Yang Empire. However, if you enter the Great Yang Empire, you'll endanger the safety of the citizens. This is unacceptable. I hope you know your place. Don't step into the Great Yang Empire and don't challenge His Majesty's authority. Otherwise, you'll have to bear His Majesty's wrath and face the encirclement of the entire empire. You'd better think about it carefully." Although the 2 imperial envoys' tone was unfriendly and their expressions were arrogant, they were the representatives of the Great Yang Empire. However, Since they were here on behalf of Great Yang's emperor, they had to be imposing. They could not tarnish the emperor's reputation. Moreover, they did not say anything overboard. Ji Tianxing was not angry. He had expected this outcome. He sneered and said, "Please tell the Great Yang Emperor that I won't harm the citizens of the Great Yang Empire. I'm only here to hunt down Prince Lian. This is to get rid of an evil for the people and also to help the Great Yang Emperor resolve one of his worries." Upon hearing this, the expressions of the two imperial envoys and the divine general changed. Anger could be seen on their faces. ****. How dare you criticize His Majesty? The golden-armored divine general scolded angrily. The two imperial envoys' expressions darkened as well. They said coldly, "Brat, do you know the consequences of slandering His Majesty? Tianxing, no matter how you quibble or plead for mercy, His Majesty's decree cannot be changed. If you know what's good for you, turn around and leave now. Don't even think about taking half a step into the Great Yang Empire." Ji Tianxing's smile became even more derisive. He nodded and said, "It seems like you know about the grudge between Prince Lian and the Great Yang Emperor. Otherwise, why would you be so angry? In that case, I'll only ask one thing. If you give me an answer, I'll turn around and leave." The two imperial envoys fell silent. After a brief discussion, the white-bearded old man said, "Ask whatever you want. However, whether we're willing to answer is our business." Ji Tianxing did not beat around the bush. He asked directly, "Is Prince Lian at Cloud Mist Pass? Did he pass by this place? Which direction did he go?" This question shouldn't make things difficult for you. In fact, you should be happy to hear it. Chapter 3183. Ji Tianxing spoke the truth. But to the two imperial envoys and the general, they felt that his words were sarcastic and full of sarcasm. The three of them didn't look too good. They muttered to themselves for a while and secretly communicated with each other. The white-bearded old man sighed, "His Majesty is indeed wise. He guessed that this guy would chase after Grand Prince Lian and boldly barge into Yunwu Pass." The middle-aged man frowned and said in a displeased tone, "This guy is very arrogant. He doesn't even respect His Majesty. If it weren't for His Majesty's orders, I would have taken action and extinguished his arrogance." The white-bearded old man said with a bitter smile, "Don't be angry. If you really took action and taught him a lesson, you would have been defeated in a few moves. Don't forget, this guy is very strong. Even a grand prince has been defeated by him. Moreover, this guy is ruthless and bloodthirsty. He doesn't care about our identities." The middle-aged man's face darkened and he didn't say anything else. The golden-armored general asked, "Imperial envoys, what do we do now? Should we tell him the truth?" The middle-aged man didn't make the decision on his own. He looked at the white-bearded old man and asked for his opinion. The white-bearded old man thought for a while and nodded. He transmitted, "It's better to avoid trouble. The grudge between this guy and Grand Prince Lian has nothing to do with us. There's no need to hide it for Grand Prince Lian. What's more, what he said wasn't wrong. If he can find Grand Prince Lian and kill him, it'll be considered a meritorious service. However, we can only keep these things in our hearts. We can't criticize him." The middle-aged man and the golden-armored general both nodded in agreement. The white-bearded old man looked at Ji Tianxing and said, "Tianxing, I'm an imperial envoy appointed by His Majesty. I'm only here to carry out His Majesty's orders. I've already passed on the message to you. As for Grand Prince Lian's whereabouts and direction, I have no obligation to tell you. However, I see that you're in high spirits and dignified. You're not as ruthless and bloodthirsty as the rumors say. Therefore, I'm not telling you as an imperial envoy. I'm telling you as an individual. Grand Prince Lian isn't in Yunwu Pass. He hasn't even been here. However, he entered the Empire's territory a day ago. As for which direction he went, this old man has no idea." After saying this, the white-bearded old man quietly looked at Ji Tianxing without saying another word. He had already said what he needed to say. Moreover, he had done Ji Tianxing a favor in his personal capacity. If Ji Tianxing continued to pester him, it would be Ji Tianxing being unreasonable. In fact, Ji Tianxing was well aware of this. Not only did he know that the white-bearded old man had done him a favor, he also knew why the old man had done so. As it turned out, Great Yang's emperor's attitude toward him was complicated and contradictory. They wanted to use him to get rid of Grand Prince Lian, but they were also afraid that he would cause trouble in the Great Yang Empire. If he could kill Grand Prince Lian, not only would he have gotten rid of a thorn in the Great Yang Emperor's side, but the Great Yang Emperor would also not have to pay any price, let alone bear the infamy. However, the Great Yang Emperor was also worried that if he went on a killing spree in the Great Yang Empire, he would incur the wrath of the people. At that time, no matter how unwilling the Great Yang Emperor was, he would have to send troops to kill Ji Tianxing to restore the prestige of the nation. He had to maintain his glorious image of loving the people like his own children to secure his position as emperor. Otherwise, he would be impeached and criticized by the diehards. However, the Great Yang Emperor knew that no matter how many elite troops he sent, they might not be able to kill Ji Tianxing. Instead, they would suffer heavy losses and sink deeper into the abyss. Once Ji Tianxing and the Great Yang Empire had a blood feud, there would be no way to salvage the situation. Even if the Great Yang Empire managed to kill Ji Tianxing in the end, they would suffer heavy losses. All in all, the Great Yang Emperor's thoughts were complicated. As an imperial envoy and a trusted aide of the Great Yang Emperor, the white-bearded old man naturally understood the emperor's thoughts. However, he could not say it out loud lest he hurt the emperor's reputation. Therefore, he very cleverly chose to tell Ji Tianxing in his personal capacity. The twists and turns in this matter were not something an ordinary person could figure out. Ji Tianxing raised an eyebrow. He cupped his fists at the white-bearded old man and said, "Thank you for telling me. In that case, I'll take my leave now." After he finished speaking, he turned around and left cloud mist pass through the gap in the divine formation. Everyone stood where they were and watched Ji Tianxing's figure disappear into the night sky. They were silent for a while. The golden-armored general waved his hand, signaling the 1,000 elite soldiers to retreat. Only the white-bearded old man, the middle-aged man, and the golden-armored general were left. The three of them began to discuss. The middle-aged man frowned in confusion and muttered, "That kid's way of doing things is indeed different from what the rumors say. He doesn't seem like a vicious and bloodthirsty executioner who will stop at nothing." The white-bearded old man stroked his beard and nodded. Putting aside the grudge between him and Prince Lian, he's a peak-stage divine lord at such a young age. He can be said to be a once-in-a-lifetime genius. Such peerless geniuses are usually very proud. How can he be a villain who won't stop at nothing? The golden-armored general breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "I originally thought that this person would be very difficult to deal with and that there would most likely be a fierce battle tonight. I didn't expect that he would be sent away so easily. Elder Yuan is really courageous to actually be able to intimidate him." The white-bearded old man stroked his beard and laughed self-deprecatingly. "General Wang, don't make fun of this old man. How can this old man have the ability to intimidate the famous killing god? It's His Majesty's prestige that killing god is afraid of and does not dare to offend. Furthermore, killing god is not a reckless person. Of course, he knows how to weigh the pros and cons. He only has a grudge with Prince Lian. He has no grudge with us. Why should he make things difficult for us and become enemies with the Empire?" The golden-armored general nodded repeatedly in agreement. The middle-aged man thought for a while and asked again, "Elder Yuan, is that kid really willing to leave just like that? Why did he believe your words without any doubt?" The white-bearded old man chuckled and said, "Firstly, this old man has no need to lie to him. There is no need for me to cover for Prince Lian. He is well aware of it. Secondly, do you think he didn't investigate? When we were negotiating, he had already secretly released his divine sense and searched the floating city several times. He didn't find any trace of Prince Lian, nor did he detect the aura left behind by Prince Lian. Of course, he has to believe this old man." The golden-armored general was even more impressed and flattered the white-bearded old man a few more times. The middle-aged man nodded slightly and thought for a while before continuing to ask, "Then in Elder Yuan's opinion, where will that kid go after leaving Yunwu Pass? Will he really be intimidated and not step into the Empire's territory?" The white-bearded old man shook his head again and chuckled. "Of course not. He is arrogant and lawless. How can he be intimidated by a few words from us? If he doesn't step into the Empire's territory, how will he hunt down Prince Lian? This is something that His Majesty has long anticipated. Chapter 3184. As it turned out, the white-bearded old man was a sly old fox. His speculation about Ji Tianxing was spot on. On the surface, it seemed like Ji Tianxing had been intercepted as soon as he entered the floating city. However, in truth, when he was negotiating with the two imperial envoys, he had secretly scouted the entire floating city. The white-bearded old man did not lie to him. Prince Lian was indeed not in the floating city and had not been to Cloud Mist Pass. That was why Ji Tianxing had left without wasting any time. After leaving Cloud Mist Pass, he did not return to the Raging Flame Divine Nation. Instead, he stepped into the Great Yang Empire's territory. However, he went around Cloud Mist Pass, crossed a desolate mountain range, and entered Great Yang's territory. As for the direction of flight, it was, of course, southeast. His next destination was Thousand Sun Lake in Thousand Sun County. That was where the Heavenly Union sect's headquarters was located. Ji Tianxing had expected Prince Lian to hide in the Heavenly Union sect since he did not dare to return to the imperial capital. Currently, Prince Lian had not passed through Cloud Mist Pass and had fled to the Great Yang Empire. He had not come into contact with the Great Yang Emperor's men at all. This proved that Prince Lian was not only guarding against Ji Tianxing, but he was also guarding against the Great Yang Emperor's attacks. He. No matter how cunning and cautious you are, you still have to hide from the Heavenly Union sect. No matter what, the Heavenly Union sect's headquarters is at Thousand Sun Lake. There's no way you can run away. As Ji Tianxing hurried along, he calculated in his mind and sneered playfully. At this moment, Lin Shue's voice rang in his mind. Brat, why aren't you fighting with the people of the Great Yang Empire? Lin Shue, left emissary Jin, and the others were recuperating and cultivating in the divine ship. On the second day of the battle on Sky Dragon Mountain, they eagerly asked Ji Tianxing about the results of the battle. Ji Tianxing told them the truth. They were shocked beyond words. After a long time of excitement, Lin Shui and the others finally calmed down. Then, Lin Shui began to complain about Ji Tianxing. Why did he kill the 13,000 soldiers alone and not give her a chance to fight? Although Lord Blood Illusion, left emissary Jin, and the others did not say anything, they felt it was a pity. They had only participated in the initial battle, but had not been able to accompany Ji Tianxing to the end. As a result, news of that earth-shattering battle spread throughout the divine nations and Ji Tianxing's name spread throughout the world. On the other hand, they were unknown and had missed the opportunity to make a name for themselves. Regarding this, Ji Tianxing's reaction was very calm. He consoled them. The battle that day was too intense. If you had participated in the battle, I would have had to divert my attention to protect you. Otherwise, you could have easily died. It doesn't matter if you miss this opportunity. Don't worry, there will be more opportunities to become famous in the future. With regards to his words of comfort, Lin Shui, Sir God Blood Illusion and the others did not know whether to be happy or depressed. Fortunately, Lin Shui only grumbled a little and did not continue to pester him. In the next 10 days, Ji Tianxing had been hurrying on with his journey. Everyone else was also cultivating in seclusion in the divine warship. Tonight, Lin Shui was truly bored out of her wits. That was why she took the initiative to send a voice transmission to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing frowned and said unhappily, "You're a savage and bloodthirsty demoness. I've only killed tens of thousands of people 10 days ago, and I've already been crowned as the god of slaughter and the butcher. If I clash with the Great Yang Empire again tonight and kill all the defenders of Cloud Mist Pass, I'll really become an executioner." Lin Shui said disapprovingly, "You're being indecisive. If I were you and had strength comparable to a godly king, I'd crush my way through. I'd kill all those who refuse to obey me. Even if I offend the entire Great Yang Empire, I wouldn't care. I'd crush them all the same. If I'm angered, I'll kill the Great Yang Emperor and slaughter the entire imperial city." Ji Tianxing could not help but roll his eyes. He said snappily, "That's why you're called the Bloody Blade Demoness, the Bloody Blade Demoness, the Bloodthirsty Demoness. You asked for it. Lin Shui was still unconcerned. She said with conviction, haven't you heard of this saying? A general's success is built on the bones of 10,000. Since ancient times, which peerless expert and hero didn't step on piles of corpses and become famous with shocking battle records? Ji Tianxing patiently lectured her. He said, even if that's the case, you can't kill the innocent. You have to kill meaningful opponents and experts to build your reputation. If I waste my time and slaughter the defenders of Cloud Mist Pass, I'll only make Prince Lian laugh his head off. Lin Shui thought for a moment before she understood the stakes. She asked, you're saying that Prince Lian is not only afraid of you, but is also wary of the Great Yang Emperor? You're in a tripartite relationship now. The Great Yang Emperor wants to use you to get rid of Prince Lian, but he can't let you damage the dignity of the empire. Prince Lian wants you to become enemies with the Great Yang Emperor and watch from the sidelines while the tigers fight. He even wants to reap the benefits. Ji Tianxing chuckled and said, you're not too stupid. You can still be saved. Go to hell. Lin Shui cursed. She said fiercely, so, you're going to the Heavenly Union sect's headquarters now and take advantage of the situation to kill Prince Lian? Ji Tianxing nodded. He asked, what else can I do? Prince Lian is running for his life in a hurry. He didn't have time to come up with a plan. This is the best opportunity to get rid of him. If I waste my time and give him a chance to catch his breath, I'm afraid there'll be more variables. Lin Shui said disdainfully, aren't you just wasting your time if you travel alone? Ji Tianxing was speechless. He could only bring out the divine warship. Swoosh. There was a flash of divine light. The pitch-black divine warship flew into the night sky and quickly returned to its original size of 10,000 feet. Ji Tianxing entered the divine warship in a flash. He walked into the control room and saw Lin Shui activating the formation. She was going to operate the divine formation herself. Hence, he could not help but ask, why are you alone? Where are left emissary Jin and right emissary Blood Dragon? Aren't you going to let them pilot the divine warship? Lin Shui glanced at him and said, they're still recovering and cultivating. There's no need for them to show their faces. I'll personally pilot the divine warship for you. It's much faster than them. This is the only way to save you time. Do you understand? Ji Tianxing spread his hands and said, since you're so considerate, what else can I say? Lin Shui glared at him again and said unhappily, then go and rest. I'll be enough to pilot the divine warship alone. I'll inform you when something happens. Ji Tianxing was a little worried. He asked, do you know where the headquarters of the Heavenly Union sect is? Lin Shui was stunned. Then, she snorted and said, of course I don't know. Then why don't you tell me? Ji Tianxing was speechless again. Why are you so arrogant if you don't know? Thousand Sun County, Thousand Sun Lake. Just fly southeast. It'll take you at least 20 days to reach there. I know. You can go now. Lin Shui urged impatiently. Ji Tianxing did not waste any more words with her. He got up and left the control room. When he returned to the secret room, he took out the Zhoutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and entered the distorted spacetime to cultivate. Chapter 3185. The dim light distorted in the sky. Ji Tianxing stood under the majestic blood flame sacred tree with a gratified smile on his face. It has indeed grown taller, and its divine power aura has also become stronger. It was just as he had expected. Previously, he had fought a decisive battle with 13,000 soldiers on Celestial Dragon Mountain and then slaughtered his way into the raging flame royal city. After that earth-shattering battle, the blood flame sacred tree had absorbed a vast amount of divine souls and bloodline power, and it had clearly become much stronger. Not only had the sacred tree grown taller, but its divine light had also become more dazzling. Even the soaring crimson flames had become more turbulent and mighty. At the same time, purple shoots had sprouted from more bare branches. The buds on the tree branches had also gradually grown into leaves. The blood flame sacred tree had gained life, and it was thriving with vitality. Yun Yarrow, Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, Zhen Hong, and the others were still cultivating around the sacred tree. The blood flame sacred tree had become stronger, and the benefits they had received had also multiplied. Their strength had improved even faster. Ji Tianxing walked around the sacred tree to check on everyone, Qian Yu, and the black dragon. Seeing that everything was normal, he also sat down cross-legged under the divine tree and began to cultivate in seclusion. The previous battles had also been a test and training for him, and he had benefited greatly from them. Especially the heaven-punishing divine art. He had gained more inspiration and understanding, and he would definitely be able to perfect it. Ji Tianxing began cultivating the heaven-punishing divine art, constantly correcting and perfecting the first stage of the art. As time passed, he continued to absorb the power of the blood flame sacred tree, and at the same time, he used up large amounts of divine stones and resources. Unknowingly, half a year had passed. The first stage of the heaven-punishing divine art had become even more perfect and wondrous. At the same time, Ji Tianxing's strength had also increased greatly, and he was gradually advancing toward the 9th level of the Divine Lord realm. Ji Tianxing did not stop, and he continued to deduce the second stage of the heaven-punishing divine art. This process was very long, complicated, and tedious. It required tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of deductions and attempts. Ordinary people did not have such comprehension and thinking ability, nor did they have such strong willpower. However, Ji Tianxing did it. Moreover, he was immersed in it and didn't feel bored at all. Time passed quickly, and the distorted space was silent. In the outside world, Lin Shui was driving the godly battleship alone toward the Thousand Sun County. The journey was very boring. In particular, Shui Huan, Left Emissary Jin, and Blood Dragon were all in seclusion in the secret chamber. She was alone in the driver's seat with no one to talk to. The first 2 days were fine, but after the third day, she felt a little bored. However, she didn't relax, nor did she dare to let her guard down. She continued to rush towards Chenyang County at full speed. She knew the importance of this matter, so how could she dare to neglect it? However, she couldn't help but mutter in her heart, "Why is it so peaceful all the way here? There isn't even a single person to intercept or track me." Even if Great Yang's emperor had a tacit understanding with Tianxing, he could continue to feign ignorance. What about Prince Lian? He must know we're chasing after him. We've already returned to the Great Yang Empire, and this is his territory. Why didn't he send anyone to intercept or harass us? Lin Shui had long been on guard against the Great Yang Emperor and Prince Lian sending people to harass them. However, things were a little strange. It was different from what she had imagined. She couldn't help but feel worried. She thought to herself, could it be that Prince Lian's influence in the Great Yang Empire is weak, unlike in the Blood Flame and Raging Flame divine nations where he can do whatever he wants? That's possible. After all, this is the Great Yang Emperor's territory. The Great Yang Emperor had always been wary of Prince Lian. How could he allow Prince Lian to expand his influence? There's another possibility. Prince Lian hasn't recovered from his injuries yet. He was in a hurry to escape and didn't have time to deploy his troops. However, that doesn't make sense. He only needs to send a transmission jade slip and explain the situation to the Heavenly Sect. The Heavenly Sect is so powerful. They should be able to send a large number of experts to intercept and kill us. Lin Shui could not figure it out no matter how she thought about it. Instead, the more she thought about it, the more confused she became. In a fit of anger, she decided to stop thinking about it. She muttered angrily, "Figuring out schemes and plans isn't my strong suit. I wonder where Tianxing and Prince Lian come up with so many ideas and schemes. Don't they feel a headache from scheming all day long? Who cares what they think? I'll just sail the ship. If we encounter a powerful enemy, we'll just fight to the death." With that thought in mind, Lin Shui felt refreshed. Her thoughts were clear. Meanwhile, in Tianfeng County that was 15 million miles away from Lin Shui and the others, a dark red divine warship that was 10,000 feet long and shaped like a huge dragon was speeding through the night sky. This was a supreme-grade monarch-grade divine warship. Not only was its defense strong, but its attack power was also powerful. Even its flying speed was astonishing. There were more than 60 people on the divine warship. All of them were elites and experts. These people were Prince Lian's confidants, his most trusted followers, and guards. Naturally, there were also a few of his favorite concubines. At this moment, Prince Lian was sitting in his personal secret chamber. He was waiting patiently for something. After a while, a young man in black armor walked quickly into the secret chamber and bowed to Prince Lian. "Greetings, Your Highness. There's already some progress." Prince Lian raised his eyebrows and said in a dignified tone, "Speak." Lian San didn't dare to talk nonsense. He directly reported, "The informant we planted in Yunwu Pass just sent news. According to the informant's report, on the second night after we entered the Great Yang Empire, an expert sneaked into Yunwu Pass. However, the general and 2 imperial envoys had been waiting for a long time and stopped that expert. I don't know what they talked about, but after some negotiation, they didn't fight. That expert left quietly. After that, our informant asked around and found out that the expert was Tianxing. Obviously, the informant Prince Lian had planted in Yunwu Pass was of a lower status and didn't participate in the interception that night. However, this news was enough for Prince Lian. He frowned and said in a low voice, "As I expected, that bastard Tianxing really went to Yunwu Pass. Since they didn't fight and even negotiated, it means that the 2 imperial envoys were happy to see Tianxing chase after me. They must have told Tianxing the truth. That's why he left Yunwu Pass. Tianxing definitely won't give up. He should be rushing toward Chenyang County. He's delusional to chase after and stop me." Lian San comforted him, "Don't worry, Your Highness. We entered the Empire a day earlier than him. Also, we can find a teleportation formation along the way. That brat definitely won't be able to catch up with us." Prince Lian didn't comment. He frowned and asked, "What about Lian Sai? Didn't I ask him to send a message to the vice sect master and elders at the headquarters? Why isn't there any news yet?" Lian San comforted him again, "Don't worry, Your Highness. Once the headquarters sends back news, Lian Sai will definitely report it immediately." The fastest mobile version of the website. Chapter 3186. Naturally, Prince Lian was not worried that Ji Tianxing would catch up to him. First, his warship was much faster than Lin Shui's monarch-grade high-grade divine warship. Second, he could use the teleportation divine formations in the various counties. No one would dare to stop him. However, Ji Tianxing would not dare to do that unless he wanted to make an enemy out of the Great Yang Emperor and declare war on the Great Yang Empire. At this moment, Prince Lian was worried about another problem. Naturally, he would not be caught or intercepted by Ji Tianxing as he fled back to the Unity Heaven sect. However, what would happen after he fled to the Unity Heaven sect? Would he be able to cultivate in seclusion without any worries? Prince Lian was not so sure. He had a big question mark on his mind. The hidden chamber fell silent. Since Prince Lian did not speak, Lian San could only stand quietly. Time passed quietly. About half an hour later, another divines in black armor walked briskly into the hidden chamber. It was Lian Sai. He quickly walked up to Prince Lian and bowed respectfully. "Lian Sai greets Your Highness." Prince Lian had been waiting for him. When he saw that Lian Sai had finally arrived, he hurriedly waved his hand to dismiss him. He asked, "Lian Sai, did the headquarters reply?" Lian Sai respectfully replied, "Reporting to Your Highness, just a moment ago, this subordinate received a message from the vice sect leader. The vice sect master said that there's been a breakthrough in the Verdant Jade Palace recently. The 50-faction alliance has successfully broken through 2 grand formations and arrived at the palace's gates." Everyone was overjoyed. Originally, the sect master had been guarding the Verdant Jade Palace with 18 elders, reverends, and 300 elite disciples. However, after this incident, the dozens of factions were eager to make a move. They secretly mobilized their forces and gathered at the Verdant Jade Palace. This was because once the Verdant Jade Palace's gates were opened, the factions would fight for a spot to enter the palace. Hence, 10 days ago, the sect master mobilized some people and sent them to the Verdant Jade Palace. Among them, there are 2 grand elders, 4 consecrators, and 200 elite disciples. When Prince Lian heard the first half of the message, he was happy and expectant. After all, He was determined to obtain the verdant jade palace. However, when he heard the second half of the story, his expression darkened, and his eyes were filled with worry. He stared at Lian Sai with a dignified gaze and asked in a deep voice, "Who is left in the headquarters?" Lian Sai was intimidated by the powerful pressure. He lowered his head in fear and replied truthfully, replying to the prince, "The defense of the headquarters is currently very weak. Only the vice-sect master, 3 elders, 12 deacons, 200 elite disciples, 5,000 ordinary disciples, and more than 10,000 servants are left." Although Prince Lian was already mentally prepared, when he heard the news, his vision still went dark and he almost couldn't help but curse. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling. He had to take a few deep breaths to suppress his anger. Damn it! Ever since I joined the heavenly sect, when has the headquarters ever been so defenseless? Why did such a thing happen when this king was returning to the headquarters? Why? Is this the will of the heavens? Prince Lian clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles cracked as he roared furiously. Lian San and Lian Sai were trembling with fear. They quickly knelt on one knee and buried their heads in the ground, not daring to breathe. After a long period of silence, Grand Prince Lian finally calmed down and muttered to himself, "Vice-sect master's strength is on par with mine. The 3 elders are only in the 8th degree realm. As for those deacons and elite disciples, they are not even worth mentioning. Even if there are more than 10,000 people in the headquarters, they will not be enough for Qianxing to slaughter. If I really return to the headquarters, not only will it not be safe, but I will also be waiting for death." Hearing this, Lian San and Lian Sai were filled with anxiety and worry. The two of them quickly tried to comfort Prince Lian and help him come up with a plan. "Your Highness, please calm down. The sect master's arrangement is also for the Green Jade Palace. It is a great opportunity and we cannot miss it no matter what. Your Highness, the sect master's will is very firm. The competition between the 50 forces is also very fierce and the battle is about to break out. Under the current situation, the sect master will not send any experts back to the headquarters. How about this? We will not return to the headquarters. Instead, we will take a detour and secretly go to the Pure Wind County. Your secret palace is there." Hearing Lian Sai's suggestion, Lian San's eyes lit up and he quickly nodded in agreement. "That's right, Your Highness. We can go to the Pure Wind County. The mystic area is very hidden. Moreover, the people guarding the palace are your absolute confidants. It will be very safe." Prince Lian hesitated for a moment and seemed to be tempted. But after a moment of consideration, he still shook his head and refused. "Although the mystic area and palace in the Pure Wind County were secretly built by me many years ago as a precaution and a refuge, it is reasonable to say that the heavenly sect and the first prince do not know about it, so it should be very safe. But I can't go there." Lian San and Lian Sai were stunned and asked doubtfully, "Your Highness, why can't you go?" Prince Lian sneered and said with resentment, "Because you are my confidants. Not only you two know about it, even Lian knows about the mystic area and palace." Lian San and Lian Sai were even more confused and asked subconsciously, "But Your Highness, didn't Lian die in battle?" "Ha ha ha." Prince Lian nodded and said, "Yes, Lian sacrificed himself and even blew himself up. He would never reveal this secret. But we were not at the scene. Who can guarantee that Lian did not betray me before he died? What's more, that bastard Qianxing is full of tricks. He will definitely use other methods to get information and secrets from Lian. I suspect that bastard also knows about the existence of the palace in the Pure Wind County. If he follows the vine to find the melon, won't I lose my life on the spot?" Lian San and Lian Sai were stunned. While they were shocked, they also felt a little disappointed. The two of them didn't expect that Lian would be so loyal to the prince. It could even be said that he would never change his mind even in death. In the end, the prince would not completely trust Lian and would even be wary and suspicious of him. Lian San and Lian Sai could not help but think that their status was not as high as Lian and they were not as valued by the prince as Lian. Then how insignificant were the two of them in the prince's heart? Of course, they were only thinking about it and did not dare to show the slightest dissatisfaction. At this time, Prince Lian continued, although what I said just now may sound a little excessive or unbelievable to you, I must be careful. But Benwang must act cautiously and prepare for the worst. If I make a mistake, I will lose everything. Do you understand? It's better to be safe than sorry. Lian San and Lian Sai felt a little better and nodded to show that they understood. Your Highness, if we can't go back to the headquarters and Pure Wind County, where should we go? Prince Lian's mouth curved into a cold smile and said in a mocking tone, now that things have come to this, where can we go? There is only that place. The fastest mobile version of the website.